Missouri. I am personally so pleased to be here in Washington. I think for our staff, my fellow commissioners, you can see that folks' interest in conservation here in Washington is very strong, from our riverfront to our beautiful pollinator planted medians throughout town. And in general, we have an incredible conservation community here in Washington. I'm very pleased to be here. And this morning, we're going to kick off with comments from our director.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners.
Good morning.
I guess I'd like to start by thanking the St. Louis Zoo for a great tour yesterday. Always appreciate the opportunity to, again, as you mentioned, Margie, the shared conservation commitment that many across the state have, and that was on display yesterday, the strong partnership we have with the St. Louis Zoo and the opportunity to tour the kind of one in the world hellbender propagation facility that's really helping us protect and conserve a really magnificent species, the hellbender. So appreciate them and appreciate the time that we had together yesterday. So with that, we'll jump right in. With spring comes turkey season, and so 17 youth hunters participated in this year's Governor's Youth Turkey Hunt, which pairs hunters with mentors and hosts to provide a memorable outdoor experience. 6 of this year's participants harvested birds. This excellent photo not only shows 2 successful hunters, but also 2 groups of people getting together to share the spring morning in the great outdoors. Thanks to all our partners who helped make the Governor's Youth Turkey Hunt happen this year, especially the Conservation Federation of Missouri, National Wild Turkey Federation. Overall, we had the best youth turkey season since the start of the youth season in 2001. This year's harvest totaled 5,724 turkeys, which eclipsed the previous record in 2025 by 825 birds. This success is attributed to both the great weather and a healthy turkey population. I had the pleasure of hosting 3 youth turkey hunters that weekend, and it was an exceptional experience. We had a great turkey season, another successful spring, harvested a total of 5,748 birds, with the top counties being Macon with more than 1,000 birds checked and harvested. This year's harvest was almost identical to last year's total of 51,000. We had 0 hunting accidents reported. Total permit sales were up 2.8%, with non-resident permit sales being down about 1,000 permits, about a 10% reduction, which is likely a reflection of regulation change made last year to restrict non-resident bags to one bird. On the private land side of things, on January 3rd, Southwest Region hosted a prescribed Fire for Missouri Landowners workshop in conjunction with Quail Forever's Habitat Restoration Team on private land outside of Seneca. The workshop included a short classroom portion, followed by an afternoon of performing prescribed fire on the site. In Kansas City Region, department staff hosted an annual Outdoors Without Limits event at the Hazel Hill Lake near Warrensburg for folks with special needs. Biologist Joe Coy coordinated the event and said it was well attended and enjoyed by all. In March, Timothy Wolf, Brian Gilbert, and a cadre of folks carrying chainsaws were requested to participate in a joint MDC-MoDOT project for hazard tree removal along a 2-lane highway at Painted Rock Conservation Area in central Missouri. The team of around 25 staff cut nearly 100 dead or hazardous trees along the highway to prevent future traffic accidents. From Southeast Region, both MDC and federal cost share helped Rodney Vaughn thin and burn his woodland in Stoddard County. In 2026, our forest nursery season wound down. For the year, the department offered 67 species of native trees and shrubs, received over 10,000 orders with more than 1.3 million seedlings distributed across 1,100 schools. The state receiving across 1,100 schools, states received the traditional 4th grade seedlings on Arbor Day. An Arbor Day tree this year was the Eastern Redbud for northern schools and the Shortleaf Pine for southern schools. On April 8th, St. Louis Region held its annual Arbor Day Luncheon. Over 150 attendees representing over 50 communities, colleges, and utility companies. All of these entities are also certified in the Tree City USA, Tree Campus, and Tree Line Arbor Day Foundation programs. So a great example of partnership work in the St. Louis region. Missouri continues to make great progress on eradicating feral hogs. The use of drones and helicopters continues to be an extremely effective and efficient method of removing feral hogs from the landscape. Last year, the partnership removed just over 6,100 feral hogs from January to May. The removal was 2,100 feral hogs on private and public land in Missouri. This year, USDA had a second helicopter equipped with forward-looking infrared FLIR camera to assist with winter operations. This new technology also assisted with feral hog elimination efforts and made the removal efforts more successful. At the time of the helicopter, the FLIR would work in unison with the gun chip, shooting and keeping track of hogs that escaped the shooters. The FLIR helicopter also worked on its own to scout for hogs. So again, evidence of increasing use of technology to make our efforts more efficient and effective. On Tuesday of this week, the team wrapped up a series of deer management community conversations that were held throughout the state. Building on the 10 open houses this past fall, the smaller roundtable conversations engaged hunters and landowners in open, candid discussions about the complex issues facing deer management. Sessions were a powerful way that demonstrated the need of increased communication and the irreplaceable value of in-person conversations. Our goal is to continue these conversations as we develop a path forward on deer management in the state in partnership with the public. I sincerely appreciate those who came to give us extremely valuable feedback. I'll note the Deputy Director Conley and I were at all of those meetings. The Conservation Agent Training Academy began March 16th with 13 trainees. The 6-month training program includes more than 1,000 hours of instruction covering a wide range of conservation and law enforcement topics. It also emphasizes preparing trainees to serve as positive ambassadors for the Department of Conservation and Law Enforcement profession. This class is scheduled to graduate in early October. Of much interest to Deputy Director Jeffries, the department continues our longstanding research work on northern bobwhite quail. While quail have experienced a range-wide decline, we have seen some bright spots on private and public lands. Using fall covey count data, we've been able to show stable areas from areas of decline, which is helping the department and partners prioritize landscapes where the habitat restoration will deliver the greatest impact. We're also collecting data on survival, reproduction, and movement to better understand habitats, limiting habitat factors, as for example, brood cover and suitable escape cover, generally the limiting factor for quail in many of our landscapes. The department has 16 maintenance shops located across the state with equipment shop technicians who support MDC operations by ensuring vehicles and equipment stay operational. Maintenance and repair tasks are only a portion of their job duties, but our equipment shop technicians also assist the department in being responsible stewards by lending their skills to design and fabricate items that are necessary for the department to accomplish our mission. Keeping fabrication projects in-house routinely saves the department a third or more of the cost as it would of outsourcing. Here are just a few of the projects the team has been able to complete over the last several months in collaboration with the regions and across the state. Projects include building a boat transom, fabrication efforts on electrofishing boats, fabrication and applying components for water units, fabricating steps for the helicopter to be worked on safely, fabrication of tanks at the hatcheries, and fabrication of the hauling trucks for our fish hatcheries. So you can see these products and fabrication projects are completed by our technicians, and we appreciate their efforts. So I'd like to provide a short update on our Share the Harvest expansion efforts. Share the Harvest is an impactful program where Missourians are able to manage the deer population and feed their neighbors in need, with more than 6 million pounds being donated, 6 million pounds of venison being donated since 1992. During phase 1 of the expansion project, we took a hard look at the current system, mapping the full process end to end, identifying bottlenecks, and defining what more effective, accessible program needs might look like moving forward. As noted on the slide, we officially wrapped up the first phase of meetings at the food bank market in Columbia, bringing together key partners to align around a long-term vision for the program. We've now moved into phase 2, where we're piloting improvements through the 2026 deer season. This work will be focused on expanding processor access to meet a 30-minute drive goal, reducing or eliminating costs for hunters to increase participation and strengthening the partnership and funding. What we learned during the pilot phase will position us for phase 3, which we will attempt to scale the most effective strategy starting in the fall of 2027 with a target of increasing the number of deer donated from 5,000 to 10,000, doubling our current annual donation. As we dive into the Share the Harvest expansion, it's clear its operations because the many partners are involved. A huge thank you goes to our hunters who donate deer, the meat processors who process the deer, our many partners who contribute to the effort, great partnership with the Missouri Meat Processors Association, Feeding Missouri, and certainly the leadership of this program from the Conservation Federation. So a lot of focus and effort being put into expanding and optimizing the effectiveness of the Share the Harvest program. MDC staff recently participated in the Missouri Comic-Con in Springfield. It was an overwhelmingly positive experience for staff as we interacted with over 2,000 individuals with over 10,000 attending the event, most of them being in that 18 to 34-year-old demographic. So we talked about relevancy yesterday. This is that work to try to continue to reach out to broader audiences. MDC staff ran specialized adventure games, informing players about ticks, leeches, mosquitoes, while also providing resources on Missouri native plants. As the school year comes to a close, Education Branch is pleased to share strong results. This year, 83% of Missouri school districts, along with charter, private, and homeschool communities, used some form of MDC curriculum, highlighting both the relevance of its content and the strong partnership with educators statewide. In St. Louis region alone, staff delivered more than 80 Train the Trainer workshops, equipping teachers, such as those pictured here from Fort Zumwalt District, with the tools and confidence to bring conservation education both in their classrooms and directly into the outdoors. Over 60 programs taught lessons in fishing, reaching more than 1,000 participants, including field experiences, such as students at Bell Fountain, Forest Park Hatchery, Columbia Bottoms, and Bush Conservation Lakes. Community engagement continues to be a cornerstone of our work. Thousands of people across the state attended Eagle Days, with more than 2,000 attending at the Audubon Center and the Riverlands Migratory Bird Sanctuary. The Missouri Master Naturalist Program is sponsored and jointly administered through an MOU with the University of Missouri Extension. As a partnership program, Master Naturalist is committed to growing and sustaining an equitable, diverse, and inclusive learning and working environment to engage Missourians in stewardship of Missouri state natural resources through science-based education and voluntary community service. The program's 937 volunteers are organized in their local chapters and are fairly self-sufficient. Annually, Master Naturalist volunteers statewide contribute more than 80,000 hours of their time to our conservation mission. It's equivalent to 39 FTEs. Volunteers in the program are self-sufficient and spend 35% of their time on natural resource stewardship, 25% of their time educating the public, just over 20% of their time administering their chapter's operations, and 17% participating in citizen science projects. And we'll close with some history notes. And finally, on May 10th, 1980, Shepherd of the Hills Visitor Center opened to the public, the original one, which was quickly, obviously identified as being way too small. On May 27, 1976, Citizen Committee turned into the petition to the Secretary of State for the 1/8 of 1% conservation sales tax. On May 20th, 1976, the Commission approved winter trout fishing at Bennett Springs on a trial basis. Today, winter trout fishing is offered in all of our trout parks and over 40 community lakes statewide. On May 19th, 1961, Tom Russell and Jerry Hamilton succeeded in hatching paddlefish eggs at Bennett Spring Hatchery. This was the first time known by science, first time for this to occur, and served as a model for other states in their paddlefish stocking programs. And the one is near and dear to my heart. On May 5th, 2011, wild elk returned to Missouri after a 150-year absence. 6 bulls and 28 cows and a calf arrived at Peck Ranch that morning. The elk were captured in December of 2010 through January of 2011 by department staff and biologists from Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. The little things of conservation's past make an impact today. And as I close out, I'd be remiss if I didn't also make a couple of acknowledgments. The first one is the retirement of Deputy Chief Scott Rice after 27 years of dedicated service to the agency and our protection division. And then acknowledge Doug Fees, who has made the decision to retire effective July 1. He's been with us for 16 years. He had 20 years of government service prior to that, and so very, very much appreciate their dedication and commitment to the agency and serving the citizens of this great state. With that, Madam Chair, concludes my update.
Commission, any questions for Director Sumners?
Madam Chair, just a comment and maybe a couple of quick questions. First of all, are the two gentlemen who are retiring here in the room? If they
Doug
are,
is.
I'd love to give them a shout out, but I don't see it. Okay, well,
Scott's already enjoying retirement.
good. Oh, good. Well, Doug, all right, there's Doug.
He was fishing yesterday.
Congratulations, Doug. I did not get a chance to say hello to everybody as I came in, so I look out and I see so many friends and people I've come to know in the last couple of years. So it's great to see this group in this amazing town and city hall. Turkey, hunting youth turkey, Director, you talked about that and the big success, and indeed it was. I think you said more turkeys were taken this season than last season, and there was a decrease in out-of-state permit requests, or maybe reported taken turkeys. So the changes made here relating to the out-of-staters, as you intimated, and along with the afternoon hunting, seem to have paid dividends. I heard a lot of great stories about young turkey hunters and slightly older and some very old turkey hunters. So my hat's off to the team for all of that.
Yeah, certainly encouraged to see increased participation from our residents. 2.8% increase in participation by resident turkey hunters is not an insignificant number, and certainly bucks the trend of where we've been on hunter recruitment and retention. And then, yeah, I think there's no doubt that both the permit fee increases that the commission has continued to move forward on, specifically on non-resident permits, and then the reduction from 2 birds to 1 bird had an impact on non-resident participation in the state this last year.
I found myself speaking about that, maybe even receiving some potential criticism about it, but as we talked it through, they all came around, and same with concepts relating to deer hunting as well, which we'll talk about. Also, my hat's off for your efforts on the quail habitat. That's something that is just always important. It's just a shame that there aren't more quail. And thank you for your tweaks and your engagement, and to CFM on the Share the Harvest program. I've brought that up here before, and that's so critically important as well. So I'm not sure I understood all the details of the 3 phases, but I know it's going in the right direction. So thank you.
It's been a deep dive by the entire team. The team at CFM. Also leaning in hard with us to say, how can we make this better? How can we increase the scale and impact of it? I think the report just reflects all the tremendous amount of work that goes on in this agency from day to day, and it ranges from our urban cities to our rural landscapes, and staff and partners are critical in the conservation mission in this state.
And thank you to you and Laura and perhaps others for doing the 10 workshops on the deer management. That's an important responsibility we have to be on top of that in every way.
It was an extremely valuable conversation. I took so much away from those. There were folks who came in extremely skeptical about the way that we've approached CWD and deer management of the state. I think it gave an opportunity for folks to hear the wide range of perspectives that people bring to these kinds of conversations, and the challenges that we have in managing a statewide deer population and a hunting public that has a lot of diverse views. I think it was valuable for the folks that attended to know that it is a department priority, and the fact that the director's office was present at all of those discussions and active in those conversations. We opened the floor for a lot of other discussions too, and it just, again, reflects the critical nature of building relationships and having conversation with people, and I think we're going to continue to try to do our level best to be engaged in the public forum.
Great. We may have to create a wandering Servid award.
Yeah, Jason and I and others definitely spent a lot of hours on the road. It reminded me about 12 or 15 years ago when I was a deer biologist and he was a turkey biologist, and we traveled the state doing a lot of deer and turkey programs. So yeah, a lot of miles on the road, but a lot of just rich and valuable conversation that you can't put a cost to. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Commissioners, anything else for our director? Thank you, Director
He
Sutton.
got away before I could ask him a question, so.
He'll go back.
Do you have any sense of how long the department has been distributing trees as part of the Arbor Day
Michael?
activities? Anybody have an idea about it?
Michael.
Yeah, so at least the 1980s. It's been a program that we've been doing for a long time. I've got a sycamore planted in my yard for my fourth grader last year that is growing, so probably many of you that have children.
Don't mow it over.
Yeah. A long time.
Excellent. Great
Thank you.
question, Ed. Thank you. Okay, next we have our regional administrator from here, the St. Louis region, Gary Calvert. Gary, welcome.
Thank you all. Waiting for the PowerPoint. Oh, there you go. Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you all. Welcome to St. Louis region and Washington, my hometown. I'm gonna answer some questions and go through some of the things that we do in the St. Louis region and take you on a little bit of a virtual tour. The St. Louis region manages 8 counties and St. Louis City. We have 3 resource districts and a community conservation team. That team manages 158 different areas, including our CAP areas, nearly 96,500 acres. We have 2 intensively managed wetlands. Our infrastructure, we have a regional office, an urban office. We have conservation nature center at Powder Valley, 5 field offices, and 31 boat accesses. So we have a lot of infrastructure that's managed. We have currently have 146 staff out of all of our different branches that work in the region, not including some of our vacancies. Our community, our private land staff to date has written 205 plans for private landowners to implement 9,500 acres of habitat practices, including 45 plans on 2,500 acres of our top 2 tiers. We've conducted 425 site visits with private landowners and led 14 landowner workshops. And our community conservation team provided assistance to 200 partner entities across the metro area, including 70 organizations that receive cost share or cooperative agreement funding. We've presented 54 partner and community events and led 15 community conservation workshops. The community conservation team has worked with 74 partners in FY25. That includes cities, school districts, federal partners, and other conservation organizations. The last 4 years, we've hosted a community conservation forum that provides educational and collaboration building opportunities for these partners working in the greater St. Louis metro area. In FY26, we had 135 attendees from 70 organizations attended this event to bolster our conservation efforts across the region. As a team, We did almost 13,000 acres of habitat work and climbing. Over 8,500 of that is in our top 2 tiers. And this work is being done on a variety of different habitat types, terrestrial and aquatic. And we had a very good year this year. Weather cooperated, and we burned over 4,200 acres. 1,100 of that was in our Tier 1 areas. This is a record year for the region as far as our burning efforts. At times, we had 3 burn teams in the region burning at the same time, a variety of different habitat, terrestrial, forest, woodlands, glades, and some wetlands. So, all right. We have a large project going on. It's a contracted project funded by ARPA. The U.S. Corps of Engineers is managing the project. We are doing a setback project, degrading levees on Columbia Bottom. This project is scheduled to be completed by the end of the year.
Where is that, just for everybody's frame of reference? Where is Columbia Bottom?
Columbia Bottoms is North St. Louis County, off just across from the north campus of the zoo.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And by opening up these levees, we're going to be able to put almost 2,500 acres back into the floodplain and still be able to accommodate folks. We do a managed dove hunt at Columbia Bottom, and several years ago we started planting sunflowers for viewing purposes, and the sunflowers are kind of staggered so that we have sunflowers viewing for a longer period of time. In July, at our peak season, we have over 35,000 vehicles enter Columbia Bottom to take pictures of the sunflowers. It's pretty amazing. All right. Our education staff partner with the Muni at Forest Park to connect with thousands of patrons from all demographics. They also work with River City Outdoors and Missouri State Parks for our youth in Tier 1 areas and Tier 2 communities. Some of these programs are Trailblazers, an in-school outdoor education program for 7th and 8th graders. The River City Explorer is a program to get youth in summer camps and explore and enjoy nature at a variety of conservation areas and parks in St. Louis. And Camp Hellbender, which is a program intended for youth, adults interested in being a kid again or trying camp activities for the first time they didn't experience earlier in life. The education staff sponsored over 20 mentored hunting experience for youth and first-time hunters, including deer, turkey, duck, and dove hunts. The gentleman on the left harvested his first turkey. He attended several clinics and gained the experience and self-confidence to go out and hunt on his own. He was extremely excited. He harvested his first turkey, and the first thing he did is came back to the range and had to show off his turkey and tell his experience. So it was really great. Our protection staff had 18,000 law enforcement contacts so far this year, almost 26,000 public contacts, 1,368 resource violations, and over 400 judge and prosecuting attorney contacts. Their compliance rate is 92%, with an incredible conviction rate of almost 98%. We have a very active community policing program through our protection staff. We had 166 programs given by agents with 7,300 program participants. And the agents have had over 62,000 interactions and conducted 87 TV and radio shows this year. some highlights from our incredible protection staff. They put on the honor guard at our Midwest Conference in St. Louis. Agent Boyd from the St. Louis region got the St. Louis Agent of the Year. Agent Boyd and Stutzman received Special Achievement Awards. Lieutenant Eulinger was named Outstanding Protection Employee of the Year, and United Bowhunters of Missouri gave Agent Clinton Agent of the Year as well. And one of our latest projects that was completed by our infrastructure maintenance staff was on Caldwell Memorial Wildlife Area, which is a hybrid area that is used for education purposes. We recently opened it to the public, and our IM staff installed ADA parking, ADA sidewalks, and an ADA accessible privy. That privy was moved from our northeast region. It wasn't being used and it was going to be raised, so we took the privy, moved it to Caldwell, and repurposed the privy to save a whole bunch of money. So this area upgrades make this area compliant, ADA compliant, and will better serve our public and educational programs. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Gary. Commissioners, I will defer to you first for any questions for Gary.
Don't have any.
I just want to applaud your work. I think everyone here knows in the department how incredibly critical your efforts in St. Louis, those urban areas, they are foundational to the success of our efforts across the state. Educating that entire region about the fabulous natural resources that we have in this state and engaging them in their protection is the only way we're successful. We can't put enough boots on the ground to preserve and protect these wild spaces, and I applaud you for the development of these partners. I ask you to just continue to do the great work that you're doing, because we have to be successful through other people. And those individuals, those organizations, having and basking in the light of that success is a wonderful part of the service that we provide to conservation in Missouri. Gary, you've done an outstanding job. Really thank you for the hard work and dedication, because I know it's sincere, and your team enjoys it. You built a great culture there, and I wish you great success and continue with it.
Thank
There
you.
was no question in that. I was just
Have a
thank
great
you very
staff. Thank you.
much. You do have a great staff.
Yeah, I may say something.
Go ahead, Ed.
Just, I hadn't been to the Bush Wildlife since I was in 8th grade in fishing club, and I went back a month or two ago and just drove through the property early one morning. It's just absolutely beautiful out there, and I can't imagine how many thousands of people have experienced fishing and just being outdoors out there. But it's just a beautiful facility. It's in the middle of a whole lot of people, but you get out there, you have no idea that you're really in the middle of a city, and it's a heck of a resource. You gotta.
It is. It's a great area.
The Bush family, whenever they donated, it's been in Bush Wildlife since I was, it's for a long, long time. That was an incredible gift.
Yes, absolutely.
Incredible gift.
Madam Chair, just a comment to second all of the other comments about how wonderful the St. Louis region is and all of the amazing things coming out of that region. The protection staff is incredible. I hear so much about that up close and personal, and when I'm out duck hunting, when I'm out and about. And last night on the way here from the zoo, I spoke to a gentleman who is a veteran, and he has an organization that he helps other veterans suffering from PTSD. And he gave a specific shout out to the protection staff who come each of the last 2 years to talk about safety in hunting and the outdoor experience. And in particular, I was trying to, he didn't recall the names offhand, but I think it was either Agent Boyd or Stutzman. And And I know those agents as I do all of these on this sheet here. So hats off to them, and also to Lieutenant Kevin
Hillier.
Giller, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, cheers to Kevin.
I'll just share some things publicly, Gary, that I know I've shared privately with you. I'm always so happy to relay huge kudos to you for your team here in St. Louis region. You had a photo in your presentation from a public school class that was out at Caldwell. I was on that field trip for personal reasons, as was my husband, and we saw several kids catch their first fish that day. And that's a pretty magical experience to have young fourth graders engage and for the first time, you know, put a worm on a hook, get a sunfish off the hook. I mean, it's a pretty awesome experience. So kudos to the staff for those upgrades just south of Washington here. And then this fall, I had a very close friend take his son to bush and use the shooting range, and our staff assisted them in sighting in his deer rifle. And that little guy took his first deer this fall. Oh, Aunt Margie might start crying. And and the staff that helped them and give that little boy the confidence to go out there and be successful. So to all of our St. Louis team, I just want to say a big thank you on behalf of the commission.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks.
Commissioners, now I will direct your attention to our consent calendar, and I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as is.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, moving on to the Regulations Committee and Deputy Director Laura Conley.
Podium is a tall podium with the laptop on it. So I'm going to sit over to the side here so I can see you all. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Sumners. Recall that earlier this year, the Commission voted to approve recommendations for 6 regulation changes, which were identified by the Regulations Committee during its annual review of the Wildlife Code. These changes include removing the waterfowl hunting only zones from Montrose Conservation Area, removing Montrose from areas close to waterfowl hunting on December 25th, and adding it to areas requiring self-registration. As you will recall, MDC does not control the water levels at Montrose Lake, which directly impacts the hunting and fishing opportunities at this area. Additionally, adjustments were made to the regulations for 2 community assistance program lakes at the request of those partners, and minor modifications were made to 2 rules to improve clarity and consistency within the Wildlife Code. Following the Commission's initial consideration in February, the proposed rulemakings were filed with the Secretary of State's office and published in the Missouri Register, which initiated a 30-day public comment period. 7 comments were received, a summary of which are found in the final orders of rulemaking included in your packet. This presentation of orders of rulemaking as formal commission action items signifies the final step in the department's regulations process. The commission has the authority to adopt as originally written, amend or withdraw the proposed regulations. If approved today, the changes will be effective August 30th of this year. Madam Chair, unless the commission has any questions or concerns, I request approval of all final orders of rulemaking with no changes to the original recommendations.
Do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
A very quick question. Does this packet of regulations speak to the CWD zones issue and the proposals to deal with minerals in new counties? I don't know if it's in.
So it will, yes. So Jason Isabel will present on those in this packet. That's not part of this vote. That'll be a separate action item.
That's okay. That's what I thought. Good. Thank you.
Great question. All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. The Regulations Committee met on April 24th to consider recommendations related to non-resident hunting participation, the upcoming fall deer hunting seasons, camping on conservation areas, and unstaffed firearms shooting ranges. Copies of all rulemakings are included in Appendix B. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Charles Anderson to the podium to provide information on non-resident hunting participation. Charles, the podium is yours.
Good morning, Charles.
Morning. Thank you, Laura. All right. All right. First, before we get into the presentation, I wanted to thank our 1MDC team. There's a lot of folks that help from the CERVID program, the social science unit, information technology, permit services that helped with putting a lot of this information, a lot of this data together for this presentation, like I said. So as a general outline of the presentation, I'll speak on the issue, participation, harvest, surveys, permit price and allocation, and approaches to address the issue. We will then move on to recommendations and future considerations. In 2025, we conducted a survey of deer, turkey, and waterfowl hunters. This survey explored resident and non-resident experiences and attitudes towards potential regulations of non-resident hunting. The results of this survey led to the turkey bag limit changes for non-residents that we discussed a little bit earlier today. To further our understanding for deer, we reviewed additional survey data and provided potential options to address non-resident deer hunter participation for public input during a 2-week comment period. I'll provide a brief summary of that input later in the presentation. To step back a little bit, what is the non-resident deer hunter issue? Non-resident deer hunting pressure is a growing concern for some percentage of resident hunters. The extent of non-resident deer hunter participation is variable across the state. There is additional data that provide insight into non-resident impact and inform recommendations. So looking at participation, overall, the number of non-resident deer hunters has increased over the last decade. In 2024, non-residents made up approximately 12% of adult archery hunters and approximately 6% of adult firearm deer hunters. When we look at the average non-resident firearm deer harvest with public land on the left and private land on the right, there is a disproportionate participation across the state. Northern Missouri experiences a higher proportion of non-resident deer hunters, contributing to the overall harvest totals compared to other areas of the state. I wanted to point out a quick example that counties like Putnam have less public land, and the average total harvest in that county for the last several years was 61 deer per year on public land across residents and non-residents. Furthermore, I wanted to point out the implications of non-resident deer hunters are greater on public land, as we are not in the business to control who a private landowner allows on their property. As I mentioned, looking into additional survey data, the figure on the left is a survey from the 2023 deer season where we asked a question to resident hunters only. If they agree there are too many non-resident deer hunters in the county they hunted the most, although there is a geographic variability in the distribution of those who agreed with that question, northern Missouri and some areas of southern Missouri experience a higher number of individuals that agreed there are too many non-residents in the county they hunted the most than compared to other areas of the state. With the table on the right, another survey conducted during the 2024 Deer Management Plan revision, we asked a question to resident deer hunters: if there are too many non-residents where I hunt. The Northwest and Northeast regions had the highest percentage of respondents agreeing with that question. For this slide, we're looking at permit price and allocation. In 2025, the adult firearm deer permit price information for non-residents in blue and residents in brown, we are comparing our firearm, any deer permit, to what the price it would take to deer hunt in another state. In some states, in addition to the deer permit, non-resident hunters may also need other licenses or stamps, such as hunting license. We just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples with our firearm, any deer permit. In general, the non-resident price is higher from states from left to right, and Missouri non-resident price is lower than most of the states and similar to Tennessee. The resident price is similar across the board, with Missouri having a lower resident price than the surrounding states. Allocation of permits is variable across these states, from draw and permit caps to over-the-counter. For example, Iowa has a draw with a limited number of permits, while Arkansas has over-the-counter system with unlimited permits. So looking at approaches to address non-resident deer hunter issues. Now, this is a differentiation of possible approaches, and this is not the actual recommendations quite yet. So when looking at a limited statewide public land draw for non-resident hunters, This would be, provide a potential for a reduction in statewide number of non-resident deer hunters, which would implicate a decrease in non-resident participation in deer harvest. Also, popular public areas may still receive visitation. This doesn't address resident concerns of non-resident impacts on private land, and we will need to evaluate the number of non-resident hunters to draw and develop benchmarks for adjusting that draw number. This would increase the wildlife code complexity, and also resources would be needed to implement and maintain draw process. And there's potential for a decrease in economic impact for some local communities. When looking at a limited public land draw for non-resident hunters with area zone specific hunter quotas, this would allow for control of non-resident hunters on specific areas and zones, would allow managers the opportunity to weigh in on quotas and give the flexibility in how they manage their areas where high opportunity versus high success. This approach doesn't address resident concerns of non-resident impact on private land. We will need to evaluate the number of non-residents hunters to draw and develop benchmarks for adjusting that draw number. It will greatly increase the complexity of the wildlife code, and we will need resources to implement and maintain that draw process. Obviously, there would be a decrease in non-resident participation in deer harvest, and there would be a potential for a decrease in economic impact for some local communities. So when looking at a statewide non-resident draw or non-resident permit cap, this would limit the overall numbers of non-resident hunters who can hunt in the state, similar to other states' allocations. It may not limit the number of public land hunters, where high-pressure areas are likely to continue to see high pressure unless cap draw is at a conservation area level. There is potential to interrupt private land hunting traditions that do not contribute to the perception of non-resident interference. And we'll need to evaluate the number of non-resident hunters to draw and develop, again, benchmarks for adjusting that draw number. There will be a considerable increase in wildlife code complexity. Our resources would be, again, needed to implement and maintain that draw process. There would be a decrease in non-resident participation in deer harvest, and again, potential for a decrease in economic impact for some local communities. Then looking at another option would be to reduce the buck limit from 2 to 1 across all methods for non-residents deer hunters. This does not include those hunting on a non-resident landowner permit. It would be similar to a non-resident turkey bag limit. It would impact hunters utilizing a non-resident deer permit on private land, and there would be a marginal increase in wildlife code complexity. Then there's also the ability to raise non-resident deer permit prices. This would impact hunters utilizing a non-resident deer permit on private and public land, has the potential for decrease in non-resident participation in deer harvest. It is unclear, however, how expensive permits would need to affect a change in the number of non-resident deer hunters. For example, Oklahoma raised their permit to $710 in 2024 and observed a reduction of 45% in non-resident deer hunters compared to 2023, with similar revenue across both years. However, in 2025, that reduction in non-resident deer hunters as compared to 2023 was only 25%. So there's potential for a decrease in economic impact for local communities with that option. And it would, however, it would not be any increase in complexity of the wildlife code. And then another novel approach that we could take is time constraints, where this is a limited duration for hunting, say maybe a 3 or 5 day permit for hunters. This would impact hunters utilizing a non-resident deer permit on private and public land. May increase conflict or interference on some public lands, and potential for a decrease in economic impact for local communities. And again, this option would be a considerable increase in the wildlife code complexity. So moving on to recommendations. And now, please note the actionable recommendations will be provided with the deer packet here with Jason Isabel coming up. This is just to provide an overview of those recommendations at this time. We are recommending a phased approach. I will also provide here in a bit in the phase one. I will also provide the phase 1 summary of that 2-week public comment period that we provided here. I mentioned a little bit earlier on. So our recommendation for phase 1 is to reduce the buck limit from 2 to 1 for non-residents. This would be a non-resident hunters utilizing non-resident firearms, any deer hunting permits, or non-resident archers hunting permits combined. Qualifying non-resident landowners would retain an antlered buck bag limit of 2. This would address resident concerns and maintain quality deer hunting while minimizing impacts on local economies and communities. Looking at the summary of public comment, 85% of respondents reporting as residents had strong support. Interestingly, there was also a 16% of respondents reporting as non-residents also had a strong support for this regulation change. Part of phase 1 for the 2027 deer season would be to implement a non-resident public land deer hunting permit to pursue, take, possess, and transport deer on public lands. This would be in addition to a prescribed non-resident deer permit. The cost of the non-resident public land deer permit, hunting permit, and non-resident archers hunting permit, or non-resident firearms any deer permit, in combination would be $525. This would be the average non-resident deer hunting price for to our neighboring states. This would address resident concerns and maintain quality deer hunting while minimizing impacts on local communities and economies. Looking at the summary of public comment, 77% of respondents reporting as residents had strong support, and not as a big percentage as the buck limit change, but about 12% of respondents reporting as non-residents also had a strong support for this regulation change. So future considerations of establishing a draw for non-resident deer hunters on public land or public and private land. There is strong support from residents for this action. However, we would have to have further evaluation looking at the effects of any of the regulation changes implemented in 2026 or 2027. And also, we'd have to look at other potential impacts there would be to resident hunters, landowners, business economies. But also, we want to have more deer management discussions, especially in the northern tier of our state, and discussing this kind of options and the impacts that may occur with that kind of recommendation. With that, I'll take any questions.
Excellent. Great presentation, Charles. If I can, I'll kick off with just some comments and a question.
Yep.
This has been an ongoing discussion that we have had between staff and the commission in looking at non-resident hunting pressure and the levers that we might consider as tools for management thereof. I jotted in my notes while you were talking, because I still have the original packet from when we were talking about this that I look at quite frequently. And when you distribute this packet, we only had 2024 prices for permits, and talking about the surrounding state data, which is something we regularly look at for comparison purposes. In 2024, that was under that $500 threshold. It was $470 was the surrounding state average. Now it's $525, as you point out, with that access permit. The hunting permit for public lands. So that's a pretty big jump, even in a year, and something that we can continue to see increase from our surrounding states in how we are treated as Missouri residents wanting to hunt in other states. I also just want to point out, and please clarify if you can, what we are talking about today is phase 1. And there are 2 parts of this phase 1 approach. The first part would be the non-resident buck reduction from 2 to 1. The second part would be next year's introduction of that public land permit for non-residents. And I think it's important to clarify 2 things on that. 1, there are exceptions for our non-resident landowners. And 2, that is not an access permit for non-residents. Non-residents still have full access to our public land.
Correct.
But rather, this permit would create the opportunity for those who want to hunt those public lands as non-residents to take and possess deer on state and federal land. Is that all correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Madam Chair, may I? Thank you, Charles, for the informative report. This topic has been important to me since I joined the commission, and I know it has been for the entire commission and immediate past commissioners, and the thoughtfulness going into this with a survey, with an evaluation of the data, is what is the hallmark of MDC. I just 2 days ago spent some time clarifying with someone who said, what is the department doing limiting who I can bring onto my property and whether I allow non-residents to hunt on my property? I said, no, that's not what they're doing. And Chairman Eckelkamp very correctly and succinctly laid out phase one, the 2 steps of phase one, and the future. But as a Missourian, when I go to other states, maybe I won't name them, but they might be surrounding states, and then paid and have to pay considerably more, whether it's for duck hunting, turkey hunting, deer hunting, whether I have to get into a draw, whether I have to wait a week or two, whether I find myself in a zone that the residents of that state don't find themselves in. It does beg for careful analysis to respond to the Missourians who are regularly saying, all I see are out-of-state license plates. Now, that's not entirely true either, and we do welcome out-of-staters, and we'll continue to do that. And balanced against this notion of $1, $2, we do have a deer problem, and another consideration, I suppose, is requiring, as some states do, that a doe be taken first and so on. But your approach, the broader approach that we're going to hear about on the science of managing the deer population, the addressing the share of the harvest issues, which are important, I think are going to make Missouri really just an outstanding place. And so thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the public in the comments about future suggestions. But there will be additional tweaks of this program, I'm certain. And the same, I might say, for turkey and migratory birds.
I do want to acknowledge, as a follow-up to that, Commissioner Wagner, that we did have public comments, as you summarized in your presentation. We had those public comments in our packet and appreciate hearing from all of those folks. I just want to acknowledge that the commission has reviewed those comments and appreciate all the outreach and the responses from the public on that. Commissioners, any other questions for Charles?
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
I just want to elaborate on those public comments because I want to thank you and ask that you please extend our appreciation to the staff, because there are passions on all sides. It's perhaps one of the most passionate issues that we have in front of us on a routine basis. Probably hear those of us on this up here and certainly across the group out there in front of us now hear a lot from the public. But we're also, in separating the emotion from the issue and looking at what's best for not just the hunting public but the resource is a tough balancing act. I applaud the team for being able to do that. I know you met with Missouri Farm Bureau, Missouri Soybean Association, and other those folks who are conduits for additional public input. For those of us who are not in the room but just are listening online, it's an extraordinary, thorough approach, and I'm confident that you did a good job capturing the opinions of the public and our partners, constituents, and I feel very confident of the intelligence really behind these. And thanks to the team for treating this with the seriousness, of course, that it deserves and being very professional in that approach. So thanks. Please extend that to the team.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Charles? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Next is Cervid Program Supervisor Jason Isabel, who will present recommendations for deer hunting season. Jason?
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So as Dr. Anderson did, I'm going to start off with some thank yous to get our presentation started. Certainly my team, Aaron Hildress, our cervid biologist, and Ashley Day, our private lands deer biologist, but also the wide range of MDC staff that assist with deer management. It certainly is a team effort. The way I'm going to structure the presentation this morning, I'm going to start with a pretty high-level overview of deer management and some of the challenges that we face, and then transition into the recommendations for this year's deer season. going to start by just acknowledging the big team effort that deer management is in our state and the huge success story that we have. And I think it's hard to imagine, but if you think back 100 years ago, we had an estimated population of less than 500 white-tailed deer in the state of Missouri. And so to get to the point where we are today is a tremendous conservation success story for us. And I would say it's a safe bet to imagine that folks back then would never imagine a time where more deer would be harvested in a county in a single day than existed in the entire state of Missouri at that time. And that's exactly what happens here in Franklin County on opening day of deer season. So it's been a tremendous team effort, the restoration of this species, establishment of our hunting season, which of course has evolved greatly over time to the point where our Missourians, nearly 500,000 of them, enjoy quality deer hunting experiences and all the important benefits that this cherished natural resource provide. So we're going to cover 4 main components of deer management: managing that deer population, providing hunting and recreational opportunity, of course the important public partnership that I mentioned in my previous slide, and then deer health and disease. So if you think about deer population management, our overall shared goal with the public is to have a healthy and sustainable white-tailed deer population. And that gets tricky when we think about balancing that and finding what I would call the sweet spot. What is the right number of deer in Missouri? To do that, we rely heavily on the public and the opinions that they share with us through day-to-day contacts and through the surveys that we send. And each year we send over 100,000 surveys to hunters and agricultural producers to ask them a wide range of questions. In particular, how do you feel about deer numbers in the area that you hunt in if you're a hunter, or that your farm is in if you're an agricultural producer? And we use all of that input to help us determine what the status of the population is and what regulation changes we might need to recommend to move the population in one direction or another, depending on what we hear from the public. We also recognize that the vast majority of Missouri is obviously under private land ownership, and so deer are residing primarily on public lands, and the folks that own those lands and manage those lands are critical partners as well, as we work towards that shared goal to have a healthy and sustainable deer population now and into the future. Certainly providing quality recreational hunting opportunities, it's important, and that's another deer management challenge because hunters have a pretty wide variety of opinions on things like the timing of the season, our bag limits, and the various regulations that we have. We know that there are several key components of a quality hunting experience, clearly the number of deer, the age structure of the population. And we know for a lot of hunters, we see some variable motivations for being out there. Obviously, food is a big one. For some, just getting together with friends and family at deer camp is a primary motivation. For others, it's managing property and trying to hold out for an older age class buck. And these aren't mutually exclusive. A lot of hunters have these shared goals. And so it's up to us to take public feedback into consideration, look at the biological factors, look at the social factors, and make recommendations that ensure that that population is healthy and ensure that we're providing the type of opportunities that our stakeholders enjoy. And so I really view it as a balancing act, and I think when we look at our regulations, we consider not only the short-term implications, but long-term implications to the overall health of our deer herd. In terms of our public partnership, the director made some comments about some of the recent meetings that wrapped up this week. So we've been certainly engaging with the public a lot in the last year on deer management. We had the 10 open houses scattered throughout the state last fall in October. And then just this week wrapped up our 8th deer management conversation with the public. I'll echo the director's comments. They were tremendous meetings. Thoroughly enjoyed getting to visit with folks. A lot of passionate folks attended those, answered a lot of questions, had a lot of great conversations and a lot of good discussion on how do we work towards that shared goal of making sure that that important resource that we have now is available not only for us now, but for the generations that follow. And so we're certainly committed to that level of engagement, and this was the first series of conversations of many to come as we work towards developing sustainable deer management strategies moving forward. And then that last key component, deer health and disease. Obviously, diseases can threaten the health of our deer herd, and so we need to do everything we can to protect the herd from those threats, of one of monumental significance, of course, being chronic wasting disease. And so we've been collaborating and working with the public now to manage this disease for well over a decade. Through that process, we have had a number of regulations that have implemented a number of management strategies. They have been critically important to keeping our herd healthy, and we recognize that they have implications for hunters and landowners as well. And in some cases, when we talk about the prohibition of feed or mineral or removal of antler point restriction, that impacts our hunters, and we certainly recognize that and don't make those recommendations lightly. But as we look again through that lens of a long-term healthy deer population, that is absolutely critically important, as we all recognize. And so those are some of the important decisions and considerations that we make with regard to making sure we reach that long-term goal. So I'm going to go through a few slides here just talking about chronic wasting disease, some of what we're seeing here in Missouri and some of what some other states are seeing. So why are we concerned about CWD? This is a 100% fatal disease. So after a deer gets chronic wasting disease, within 1.5 to 2 years, they're going to die of the disease. We also know it predisposes them to other forms of mortality along the way. And so it's certainly a drain on populations when you get enough disease on the landscape in a herd. Thankfully, this is not a common sight in Missouri, given the low levels of disease that we have. This picture on the left there is a deer that died of CWD in a high prevalence area of northwest Arkansas, where about half the deer have the disease. The one on the bottom right is a deer that died of CWD in southwest Wisconsin, which also has really high prevalence rates. So you can probably notice the radio color on these deer. These deer were part of a research project where researchers live captured the deer, tested them for CWD, released them back onto the landscape. When they got the test results back, they could look at their data and say, okay, this group of deer had the disease upon capture, this group did not. And then they could look at the survival rates of the two to see the impacts of the disease on the population. And so, as I mentioned, thankfully this is not a common sight in Missouri, but in areas that have a lot of chronic wasting disease, it's very common to see clinically sick deer, and finding deer like this that have died of the disease is not uncommon. And so certainly a situation we're working hard to try to avoid here in Missouri. We have had some deer that have died of CWD in Missouri. This happens to be a picture of a deer in Jefferson County just this past year. And we've had a couple recently within the last year or so in the Hannibal area, but thankfully, as I mentioned, the disease is at its very early stages here in Missouri, and our management efforts have helped to keep the percentage of the herd that has the disease at very low levels. I'm going to look at some data from a Southwest Wisconsin research project. So the deer that you saw a couple slides ago there on the lower right was part of this research project. It was a really comprehensive project. A lot of deer were collared and monitored. And among the other things that they looked at in this research project was how do survival rates differ based on whether or not a deer has CWD. And so if you look at the table on the screen, of all the does that they collared that did not have CWD upon capture, just over 80% of them were surviving to the next year. So pretty common survival rate for healthy does. For the does that had CWD, it was less than half, so only 41% of CWD positive does were making it through the year. If we look at the buck segment of their collared sample, it was even more of a staggering difference. So about 7 out of 10 healthy bucks were making it from 1 year to the next. If a buck had CWD that they had collared, less than 1 in 5 were making it through the year. So if you look at these numbers, certainly very concerning. If you think about the elevated mortality on the female segment of the population, that's certainly something very concerning from a population sustainability standpoint. If you think about it from a hunting standpoint, particularly hunters that enjoy hunting and harvesting older age bucks, if you've got half the bucks that test positive for CWD, which Wisconsin does in some counties, and only 1 in 5 CWD positive bucks are making it from 1 year to the next, that's certainly a concern from the overall age structure of that buck segment of the population. These are preliminary data out of a study in West Virginia that was very similar to the one in Arkansas, Wisconsin. They live captured deer, radio collared them, tested them for CWD. And in this particular case, these data show cause-specific mortality. So of all the radio collared deer that died during the study, what was killing them? The most common cause of death was CWD. And that's not deer that were killed by a hunter or by a predator that tested positive. That is clinical CWD. So the most common cause of death in this study was chronic wasting disease. It was taking more deer than hunters were, more deer than predators were, and more deer than all of these other forms of mortality combined. So certainly very concerning. If we look at this map of Wisconsin, we see all the small gray dots there would be CWD positive locations. And I'm going to draw attention to a couple counties because I think they tell an important story of what can happen when CWD prevalence rates reach high levels. So the first county we're going to look at is Crawford County. You can see it circled in red there. It's just on the western edge of the endemic area. CWD is there. You can see the gray dots in that red circle, but clearly not as much disease as further to the east. So in Crawford County, they have lower CWD rates. Hunters are seeing more and more deer each year. Their buck harvest is steady to increasing, and in 2024, they had a record buck harvest. If we look at Iowa County, which geographically is not very far away, just a little bit further to the south and east, more CWD in Iowa County. Hunters are seeing fewer deer, buck harvest is dropping, and in the same year that hunters in Crawford County shot a record antler buck harvest, Iowa County hunters had the lowest buck harvest in 45 years. And this pattern isn't unique to Wisconsin. If we look at northwest Arkansas, we see the same pattern. If we look at southwest Tennessee, where they have high CWD infection rates, we see the same pattern there. We'll look at real quickly Richland County, just north of Iowa County, and wanted to share this quote from Paul Anier. Paul is a freelance outdoor writer, family farm in Richland County, just to show the impacts to deer hunters on a more personal level. So Paul says in the quote there, as you can see, that the majority of deer he's harvesting on that family farm are testing positive for the disease. He's seeing the impacts on the buck age structure on his family farm, and it's the biggest turnoff to deer hunting that he's ever experienced, speaking about CWD. And this trail camera photo was one of Paul's pictures on his family farm. It was one of 3 deer that looked like this during the deer season a couple years ago. So we know it affects deer populations. We know it affects deer hunting. Another thing we know is that management keeps the herd healthy. Active management is able to keep CWD prevalence rates low. So on this graph in the orange line, we see the prevalence rate or the infection rate, simply the percentage of samples testing positive for CWD, and that's in 3 southwestern Wisconsin counties. The blue line is prevalence rates in Macon and Linn County here in north central Missouri. So I've standardized on this graph time of initial detection. Obviously, Wisconsin detected CWD far earlier than we did, but that's been standardized on this to show year 1 is the year Wisconsin detected it, year 1 is the year we detected it in north central Missouri. So as you can see, in both of these examples, less than 2% of deer are initially testing positive for CWD. Wisconsin, like us, had adopted an aggressive localized management strategy, but had to stop that effort in year 6, which you can see in the middle of the graph. And then you see prevalence rates start to increase at a pretty good clip. By the end of the graph here in year 13, they were almost at 12% of samples testing positive. If we look at the blue line, less than 2% when we started, we were able to sustain localized management in those counties, and at the end of the graph in year 13, we're still less than 2%. So I think this graph does a very good job of comparing and contrasting what happens when you're able to sustain localized CWD management efforts and when you do not. A couple other things to point about this graph is that 5%. So this would be what we would call the tipping point. And if you walk that over to the left side of the graph, you'll see that corresponds to about 5% prevalence rate. So, on about 5% of the herd has the disease. That is the point where the prevalence rates start to increase really dramatically after that point. And so we would call this area here the window of opportunity. And so that's a prevalence rate less than 5%. So what we've been able to do here in Missouri through sustained active management is to keep that prevalence rate below that tipping point. And that is really our goal. CWD is here to stay in Missouri. We're not getting rid of it, but our management goal is to keep the percentage of the herd that has that disease as low as we possibly can through management and keep us below that tipping point, because once we hit that 5% tipping point, management becomes very, very difficult to implement at a scale that's going to change the trajectory of that curve. Talk a little bit about our deer management and how it's adapted through time. Certainly we've had some changes to the approach of management here in Missouri. We've had changes in regulations along the way. And so as we look at the changing distribution of CWD in our state, we have CWD detections in new areas of the state. And so we've certainly adapted along the way. And I think what we've seen as the disease has popped up in different parts of the state, it's increased the complexity of our regulations to some degree. And so within the last year, our staff looked at all of the regulations associated with managing chronic wasting disease and looked at it through the lens of how can we continue to minimize the impacts of the disease, but also do that in a way that minimizes regulatory complexity for hunters, which we know can be an issue. And so part of those recommendations were brought to you commissioners back in December. The recommendations that I'm going to present today, at least a portion of those, are other recommendations that are for the 2026 deer season. The first recommendation that we have is to add Benton, Johnson, and Pettis counties to the list of counties where placing feed and mineral for deer is prohibited. So the commission has already approved in previous meetings the elimination of the CWD management zone designation, but retain the ability to prohibit the placement of feed and mineral in counties that are within 10 miles of a positive detection. So all the counties that you see in orange there are counties where it's currently unlawful to place feed and mineral for deer, and the 3 counties in red would be our recommendation for adding those 3 counties to that list, given that there was a recent detection in Henry County that was within 10 miles of those 3 counties. So it would bring those 3 counties into that larger grouping of counties where feed and mineral placed for deer would be prohibited. And that's because the misfolded proteins that cause the disease are in high concentrations in saliva. They're also in feces and urine. Deer congregate to those feed sites, those mineral sites, and so it just increases the risk of transmitting the disease. And so we recognize that there are many hunters that enjoy placing feed and mineral for deer, but again, looking through that lens of what's best for the long-term health of the herd, we recommend that these 3 counties be added to that list. Our next recommendation is to require hunters in 28 counties to present their deer for CWD mandatory sampling on opening weekend of the November portion, which this year is the 14th and 15th of November. So the map that you see, all of the counties in orange would be the recommended counties for mandatory sampling. White would be a recommendation to not have mandatory sampling this year. We're also recommending that we start conducting mandatory sampling on a 4-year rotation. And so that would involve conducting mandatory sampling in each county once every 4 years on a predictable and structured pattern. And so in previous years, when we had the management zone, we could do mandatory sampling in each county in the zone, and it was pretty straightforward. As the zone expanded and we had more counties in the zone, we would have to prioritize annually which counties we would propose to do mandatory sampling. And so counties would be in 1 year, maybe out the next year. We feel like with the distribution of CWD that getting locked into a predictable rotation offers several different advantages. It would allow us to conduct mandatory sampling, as I mentioned, in each county periodically. It would be a predictable pattern for our hunters to understand. It would certainly increase the efficiency and ease of planning for our agency staff as well. And so we think that that is the right approach for this really important surveillance tool moving forward, recognizing that without mandatory sampling, it's difficult to get the numbers of samples that we need to accurately characterize the distribution of CWD in our state. And also recognizing that mandatory sampling is one part of a much bigger CWD surveillance effort. So we work with taxidermists, we work with meat processors, we have freezer head drops, we have voluntary sampling at our offices, we sample sick deer. So this is one part of a much more comprehensive strategy, but a very important one. Our third recommendation is approval of amendments to conservation area deer and turkey regulations as incorporated by reference in the fall deer and turkey booklet. So you can see in the bulleted list there are several conservation areas that we recommend be added to the booklet. August Beckemeyer Conservation Area in St. Louis region to allow a managed hunt on that area. Blazing Prairie up in Northwest, which is a relatively new area. And then you can see in the third bullet there several areas in Kansas City and Southwest region that were formerly owned by TNC to where hunting was not allowed, so recommend adding those to the booklet. And then several areas in our Southeast region that already are open to spring turkey hunting. We recommend being open to deer hunting. They are landlocked, and of course, so hunters would have to get permission from neighboring landowners to access there, but wanted to provide that opportunity on those areas as well. Next recommendation is approval for managed hunts for the 2026 season. There are a number of new managed hunts that were not in place during the 2025 season. I already mentioned the archery hunt there in St. Louis region, the St. Louis County, the very first one. You'll notice that the majority of the rest of them are on state parks, so those are not necessarily new managed hunts, but they weren't managed hunts that happened in 2025. The Department of Natural Resources does deer surveys on their areas, and when deer numbers are above the threshold, they'll recommend having the hunt, and when they're below the threshold, they will recommend not having the hunt. And then the last recommendations, number 5 and 6, the first one, and these are referencing the presentation that Dr. Anderson gave before I get up here. So the first recommendation is for this year's deer season to reduce the antlered buck bag limit from 2 to 1 for non-residents that are hunting on a non-resident firearms any deer permit or a non-resident archer's hunting permit. So that would be a 1 buck limit, except for qualifying non-resident landowners would still retain that 2 buck bag limit. The next recommendation for the 2027 deer season would be to implement a non-resident public land deer hunting permit at a cost of $165 as an additional requirement for a non-resident to pursue, take, possess, and transport deer on public lands. And again, not an access permit, but a permit that would be required to pursue, take, possess, or transport deer on public lands in 2027. So the last slide that I have, I wanted to end where I began and just talk about the team effort that deer management is. It certainly is a challenging subject and topic, one that I feel is a pretty complex balancing act that certainly has a lot of factors to consider. Some of them are biological, a lot of them are social. And that's where that partnership that they have with the public becomes critically important. The information that they provide is an absolutely critical part of the decisions and recommendations that we make as we work towards our shared goal of making sure our deer herd stays healthy. And so we recognize the importance of that participation, and we're committed to continuing to work with the public very closely as we develop strategies to continue managing for a healthy deer herd here in Missouri. That concludes the presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Jason. If you could you go back to your slide 14? It's the graphic with the tipping point, and I have a question as a follow-up there. You talk about the window of opportunity, and therein lies what you consider active management tools. Can you just give us a list of, when you say active management, what you're referring to?
Sure. So that active management, as I'm characterizing it here and referring to this graph, would be localized management. We know from the success that we've had here in other states that being able to remove additional deer in areas where we've found positives is a way of reducing disease transmission, keep those prevalence rates low. And can look in one of many different ways. Clearly, the approach we've taken here in the past was targeted removal. Those efforts have been indefinitely paused at this point, and we're working with hunters and landowners to start determining what the future of those efforts would look like here in Missouri. But that could be additional hunter harvest during deer season, like our Hunter Harvest Initiative. But what I'm referring to there is that localized management close to where positives are occurring. And that doesn't mean that broader scale regulations can be impactful as well, but we know that localized management right within a mile or two of where we've detected positives has been critically important for getting us the trajectory of that line that you see here in Missouri on this graph.
When we talk about CWD, I think it's important to kind of differentiate management from surveillance. And so when you talk about our proposed CWD mandatory sampling, you are suggesting that we sample every county once every 4 years, no matter if it is a CWD positive county. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, and there's certainly some trade-offs there, and I feel like we did a really thorough evaluation to make up that recommendation. And the trade-offs that you're kind of weighing there, and we saw some of that with last year's mandatory sampling. We had counties last year that we've had more CWD detections that we did not do mandatory sampling in favor of doing some in some brand new counties where we didn't have the extensive surveillance history. So it offers us a way of checking in on counties that we know have the disease to monitor the distribution, but in counties where we don't have the disease, it allows us a really good opportunity to detect it early if it exists there. And then again, viewing mandatory sampling as not the only way that we collect samples, and recognizing that we collect a lot of samples in other ways. So even in counties that do not have mandatory sampling during that 3-year window, we still have lots of other ways to get samples, and we'll continue to do that so that even though mandatory will only occur once every 4 years, we're still collecting samples throughout the state on an annual basis.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Ed?
I have a question on that same slide. There's, we've got targeted removal stops at year 6, and as you were discussing that, you said that Wisconsin had to stop in year 6. When you say had to stop, what's that choice of words mean exactly?
Yeah, so the Department of Natural Resources was no longer able to conduct targeted removal. There was some significant public concern with that tool, and so the department lost its ability to do that.
Okay, thank you. And if I could ask one other question.
Absolutely.
On the page 238, which is just 2 pages past this one, I'm trying to make sure I understand this. It says proposed counties with feed and mineral prohibition for 2026. Are there feed and mineral prohibitions right now?
There are, yeah. So the way we have approached that in the past is that any county that was in the CWD management zone, which would have been any county that had a positive detection or any within 10 miles, would have a feed and mineral prohibition. Since the CWD management zone designation was removed, we would retain that same criteria so that if it was a positive county or those within 10 miles, there would be a feed and mineral prohibition in place. So the recommendations for this packet are consistent with how we have approached that regulation in previous years.
So would it be a violation then of some regulation if you were to use mineral blocks in these counties?
There are some exceptions to that. For example, if you are doing it within 100 feet of a occupied building or dwelling, to allow folks that want to do that close to a home, there are some exceptions. But outside of that, yes, it would be unlawful to place those, other than normal agricultural practices.
Right. Thank you.
Great questions. Yes, Ray? Or Frank? You guys can arm wrestle.
No.
I insist.
Can you give a little bit of an expose on the status or condition of innovation and testing for the disease?
Yeah, so that remains an active area of research, and one of the areas that remains an active area of research that folks are really putting a lot of stock into is trying to develop a more rapid test. And so the testing that we use here in Missouri is standard for what other states are using, and it results in a turnaround time of, a lot of samples are coming back within a couple weeks, but up to 4 weeks. And I think we made some big strides to shorten that, but for a lot of hunters, they'd like to see it quicker. So one of the areas of research is to try to get a certified test that would allow them, for example, a deer side test or something a hunter could use themselves. There are some of those on the market currently, but the platform that those use have not been certified by the USDA for regulatory purposes. But the thought process there is we will get there at some point, and they are working on that. We're just not there yet.
So and then a side comment, when we talk about active management, it is my own opinion that anytime we put restrictions on, baiting deer, for lack of a better way to put that, mineral or feeding deer, to me, that's just as active management as targeted removal. And it seems to me that what you're saying is active management in your nomenclature is just simply targeted removal. Am I misunderstanding that?
So I don't think it's just not targeted removal in general. So I think when I say act, and maybe localize is the more appropriate term. Active, of course, can mean a lot of things. So the way I view our regulations with respect to CWD is they occur at variable scales. So you've got some regulations that are statewide, some that are only in select counties, and some of our practices have been zoomed into that 1 to 2 miles from a positive detection. They could all be considered active, and they all work in different ways to maintain the health of the herd. But certainly, whether it's the carcass disposal regulations or the prohibition on feed or mineral, those help to keep prevalence rates low. And then at that localized level, we've approached that in the past in a number of different ways. Targeted removal has been one of them, but we also have issued CWD management permits to give hunters more opportunity during deer season in those localized areas. We've also established the Hunter Harvest Initiative the last couple of years to try to encourage hunters in select areas to remove additional deer. So I think it could be viewed at several different scales, but at that localized level, we've had success with targeted removal, but that's not the only way localized management can occur. And as I mentioned in the idea behind the Hunter Harvest Initiative, in those localized areas, if we're able to have hunters that are willing to harvest additional deer in those localized areas, that could certainly, would have the same effect as targeted removal.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Commissioner Wagner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, as always, informative presentation, and it's good to have some of this reiterated. I am coming to understand this now after a couple of years of hearing much about this. Two of the components talked about here were the mineral placement and the limits around that, and another one dealt with the mandatory testing and the rotating every 4 years a different set of counties to be require mandatory testing. When the CDW, the zone concept was lifted more or less earlier in the year, there was some speculation, every county is going to become an anti-mineral county or whatever. There was some talk about that. These 3 counties, and you gave a good explanation, they are counties where there was a detection of CWD, and as I look at them on this map, this color-coded map on page 16, they are outliers to what's otherwise all around color. There's another county in there, I can't quite read it, Berry or something, that is not yet subject to the ban. But do you envision this ban quickly expanding next year to all the other counties in the state, or do you envision it, where do you see that going?
Yeah, so before I answer, I'll back up. Those 3 counties themselves have not had a detection, but there was a detection in a neighboring county that was within 10 miles.
Okay.
So that's why the recommendation was made. The pattern that we've seen in the past is we continue to have low levels of CWD, but we are seeing it pop up in new counties and new places. And so the results that you see on that map, the orange counties are positive counties, or those within 10 miles. And so based on the pattern that we've seen, it's likely that the disease will pop up at some point in the future in or near those counties that are white on the map. And so if we follow the same set of recommendations that we've had thus far, could envision more counties being added to that list in the future.
Yeah, and maybe what I'm getting at is with the notion of dividing the state into 4 groups of counties, and in theory, I suppose, I'm not sure how it will be implemented, each year you'll go out and test groups, state or counties, group A, next year B, next year C, next year D, come back to A, maybe you'll mix them up. If a county is not found to have an incident, a CWD, will the mineral ban be potentially lifted at that point in time, do you think?
So it's a good question, and if we look back at the history of management of the disease in the state, there was a point in time where we had a groupings of counties that was brought into the zone based on initial detection in Cole County. We did intensive surveillance around that positive for 3 years, did not find any additional positive, and then that grouping of counties was removed from the zone.
Right.
That was a bit of an anomaly, and most of the time we detect a positive, we'll usually detect not a lot of other positives, but more than one.
Yeah.
And so based on the distribution of the disease in the state, my recommendation would be, it would be pretty risky in terms of an overall herd health standpoint to remove counties from that feed and mineral prohibition. I think we have enough detections in enough counties that would be pretty risky.
Mm-hmm.
And so the recommendation that I would have at this point would be, given what I just mentioned, to not pull back on those at this point in time.
Good. Well, obviously, we have time to revisit all that, but I understand and I don't disagree. Last comment on the instant testing that you talked about. I had a conversation last week, a meeting with a science innovator, a lab incubator for startup science projects, not related to deer. None of them were, but all kinds of human diseases and so on and so forth. And there is a thirst, I think, to come up with cures, detection, and so on for disease in animals. This organization works with the eye community. And so I hope, you mentioned there are some instant testing, they just haven't yet been approved by the FDA, and that seems to me to make a big difference down the road when I can take out my little COVID test-like device or pregnancy test-like device, and with saliva get an instant detection. And so we ought to find a way to support those efforts and FDA approval and whatever it takes. So anyhow, congratulations on all this stuff, and keeps moving forward.
Thank you.
No, right. I think that was a great comment because it circles us back to what the real issue is here, and that is this disease. And that's something that we can all be unified behind, that we want an end of this disease. We don't want sick deer. We don't want folks questioning if they're eating meat from a sick animal, and we want a healthy, sustainable deer herd here in Missouri. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Commissioners, as you'll recall, in December 2025, the Commission voted to set dates for each portion of the 2026-2027 deer season to allow hunters as much time as possible to prepare for the following year's season. As a reminder, dates for this year's firearm deer season are as follows. The early antlerless portion will run from October 9th through 11th, 2026. The early youth portion, October 24th to 25th, 2026. The November portion of firearms deer season, November 14th to 24th, 2026. The late youth portion, November 27th to 29th, 2026. The late antlerless portion, December 5th through December 13th, 2026. And the alternative methods portion from December 26th, 2026 through January 5th, 2027. Commissioners, the first set of action items for the 2026-2027 deer season includes a recommendation to add Benton, Johnson, and Pettis counties to the list of counties in which placement of feed and minerals for deer is prohibited. A recommendation to require hunters in 28 counties to present their deer for CWD sampling if harvested during opening weekend of the November portion of firearms deer season, and recommendations for managed hunts and hunting regulations on conservation areas. Madam Chair, I request commission approval of these recommendations as presented by Mr. Isabel.
Do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Maybe a follow-up question, Laura, and sorry, Jason, if you have to answer this from the back. Part of our season framework, one of our intentionalities was to simplify it a bit while still providing ample opportunity. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so we did make some changes previously. So you'll recall we did have a CWD portion of firearms deer season, and that since has been removed with the removal of the management zone. And the team continues to look at ways that we can think about simplification associated with that. And if Jason has anything else to add, I'll certainly let him chime in.
Sorry, Jason. I probably should have asked while you were still up here.
Yeah, so, as Laura mentioned, it was really just a way to address the complexity of that structure. And when we had the open comment period associated with the deer management plan revision, one of the comments we heard that came up most frequently was there are a lot of different portions of deer season and things are getting a little bit confusing. And so as we looked at the structure of deer season, we had 7 portions of deer season. We had the early antlerless in early October, and we had the 5-day CWD portion. We really are not seeing a lot of additional harvest during that CWD portion. And so based on that feedback, to try to simplify things was a way of consolidating things a little bit, get rid of that one additional portion, while still recognizing that we have a lot of opportunity for firearms deer hunters.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. All right, commissioners, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. Commissioners, included in your packet are 3 orders of rulemaking for the 2026-2027 fall deer season. These changes relate to season limits and are exempt from initial filing as proposed amendments. If approved, these changes will be effective July 1st, 2026. Madam Chair, I request commission approval of these orders of rulemaking to reduce the non-resident antlered buck bag limit from 2 to 1, excluding qualifying non-resident landowners, as described in Jason's presentation and detailed in your packet.
Do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. The next suite of recommendations would establish a permit requirement for non-residents to pursue, take, possess, and transport deer on public lands. If the commission grants initial approval today, these will be filed with the Secretary of State's office as proposed rulemakings with a 30-day public comment period, which will run from July 16th to August 14th. Comments would then be compiled and shared with you prior to final consideration at your September meeting. Madam Chair, I request approval of 3 CSR 10-5.281, non-resident public land deer hunting permit, 10-5.950, hunting, fishing, and trapping permit pricing, permit fees, permit replacement costs, and 10-7.431, deer hunting season general provisions, as presented and detailed in your packet.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Laura, would you summarize, and I think we've essentially done that the last hour or two, what is the heart of this regulation? You start out by saying in your words, I think, to prohibit or to regulate the movement of deer in public lands by non-residents, I think.
Yeah, so this permit creates a requirement for a non-resident who is wanting to deer hunt on public land to have this additional permit to be able to take, possess, or transport deer on public land in the state, in addition to their other deer hunting permit, whether that be an archery deer hunter's permit or their non-resident firearms deer hunting permit. This would not be any kind of requirement related to private land. It's strictly for public land. And so as Charles presented and as Jason presented, this is a topic that we've heard a lot of conversation about. We've had a lot of public input on related to crowding issues, interference issues, perceptions of resident hunters within the state as it relates to non-residents on public land. And so this is intended to help address those issues, and the cost associated with this permit would be $165. So that, in addition to the other required deer hunting permit, would basically bring that permit cost up to the equivalent of our neighboring states, or the average of our neighboring states.
Thank you. And the reason I asked is, my question was, is it one must possess the license, or I think the way you couched it, maybe semantics, one may not move deer, transport, or take a deer unless they have this license. So there,
Yeah, so it is another deer hunting permit. And so just like you would need your firearms deer hunting permit, if you were to hunt deer on public land, you would have to have this permit as well. So it's not an access permit. Anybody can visit public lands, but if you are deer hunting, you would need this permit to be able to take, possess, transport. And it's the same requirements as your firearms deer hunting permit or your archer's deer hunting permit.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Wagner. Thank you, Laura. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, we're going to shift away from deer and present recommendations related to camping on conservation areas and the use of unstaffed shooting ranges. If granted initial approval today, these would be filed with the Secretary of State's office as proposed rulemakings with a 30-day public comment period from July 16th through August 14th. Comments would then be compiled and shared with you prior to final consideration at your September meeting. You heard an introductory presentation on these topics at your March meeting. Here again today are Recreational Use Coordinator Tyler Blake and Hunter Education and Shooting Range Coordinator Justin McGuire. Gentlemen, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Laura, Madam Commissioner.
Good morning. It's the sequel.
It is the sequel, Director. So I have just a few slides for you this morning to talk about issues that we have with camping and our proposed recommendations. And then I'm going to shift it over to Justin to talk about unstaffed shooting ranges. So as I shared in March, our staff routinely deal with all manner of camping challenges. We have campers who don't comply with area regulations, reports of campers who try to reserve a spot ahead of busy camping period, leaving their stuff unattended. And we don't really have a good way of tracking these issues. We also have numerous public safety concerns, illegal and criminal activities, drug use, people hiding from the law. And so we often have public and staff sometimes who just don't feel safe in our campgrounds or where folks are camping. And then on top of that, there's also environmental concerns with abandoned campsites. We have RVs that are left behind, tents, gear, trash, all of that. And so as a result of all the ongoing misuse, we end up having to close areas to camping at sometimes. No, yeah. Sorry, I'll talk into the mic a little bit more. And so over the last few years, we've closed several camping areas, several areas to camping in an attempt to kind of mitigate and as a response to some of these issues. And really, we want all Missourians to be able to feel safe and enjoy the outdoors responsibly, right? So we're looking into ways that we can expand camping on our areas. In order to do that, we have these recommendations that, if approved, we think will provide better and safer camping experiences. We want to be able to improve our monitoring of unwanted activities, and we need to better track how long individuals are camping on our conservation areas. And so in order to do that, our recommendations are something. Let's see. There we go. So in response to all these, our recommendations are to require a low-cost camping permit for all camping on conservation areas. So it would be valid for 5 days, so it would be 4 nights of camping. It would be valid for up to 10 people, so you could have a group of campers under 1 permit, and it would allow up to 2 sleeping units. And we provided a definition of sleeping units that's basically just anywhere you would temporarily stay for tents, RVs, campers, hammocks, all of that. And then it would also be valid statewide on any conservation area that allows camping. And then we are now requesting that we tie the length of stay for camping to the permits. So right now, camping is 14 days consecutively or 30 days annually. In order to tie that cleanly with the permit, it's a 5-day permit, so we're saying a max of 3 permits purchased consecutively, and then a max of 6 permits annually. And so it aligns with those current regulations. We are also requesting a proposal to that personal property may not be left unattended for more than 24 hours. This is to help address the folks who are leaving their stuff behind and then coming back over the weekend and reserving their spots. We are requesting that sleeping units be labeled with name and address or conservation ID number. So when you get a permit, you'll already have a conservation ID number, so you can label it with that number or your name and address. But every sleeping unit should be labeled with the permit holder's information so that we can tie it back to the permit.
This applies to all conservation areas or just where there's gun ranges?
So this unstaffed shooting range conversation will come next. This is specifically for camping on conservation areas. Yep.
Thank you.
And then we would also like to add a provision that you can collect dead and down woody material for campfire use only. This is something that we're already allowing. We are not surprised, but there's no real clear regulatory authority to technically allow it. And so this is something that we want to enable and provide clarity for staff and the public that you can, yes, collect dead and down woody material for your campfires. And then with that, I will hand it off to Justin.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director,
Good morning.
good morning. As you'll recall from my March presentation, the usage of MDC's 37 unstaffed firearms shooting ranges has changed over time. This has led to increased maintenance and an increase in illegal shooting range misuse. In response to these challenges, we are proposing for your consideration a requirement that users of MDC's unstaffed firearms shooting ranges possess a small game hunting permit. This proposal includes language to add shooting range permissions to the following permits in Chapter 5 of the Code: the Resident Lifetime Conservation Partner Permit, the Resident Lifetime Small Game Hunting Permit, the Resident Small Game Hunting and Fishing Permit, the Resident National Guard and Reserve Service Small Game Hunting Permit, the Resident Small Game Hunting Permit, the Daily Small Game Hunting Permit, and finally, the Non-Resident Small Game Hunting Permit. This proposal adds shooting range language to the existing exceptions, such as youth under 16 and adults age 65 and up. In addition to adding this language to the developmental disability exception, we propose to remove the requirement for disabled individuals to attend a hunter education course before qualifying for the exception. This change will align this exception with youth and apprentice hunter authorization requirements. Changes to Chapter 11 of the Code are proposed to name each shooting range this requirement would affect, and also name each of the staffed shooting ranges this proposal would not affect. Furthermore, we are proposing formatting changes to bring clarity to shooting range rules listed in this section. This proposal will help ensure that users of unstaffed firearms ranges receive firearm safety training through the hunter education requirement, enforce a sense of ownership and buy-in for these important public resources by all users, and give the conservation agents another tool to improve public safety at MDC ranges. A comprehensive communication plan is in place. Stakeholder engagement has already begun. We've reached out to both the Corps of Engineers and the National Rifle Association to gather feedback on the proposed shooting range permit requirement. We're also considering in-person engagement with shooting range users, both during the open comment period and during the periods of heavy usage in the fall later this year. When applicable, all commission action will be shared through media channels. Strategic social media outreach will include highlighting public use issues in the fall of this year into the spring. Social media marketing will feature camping opportunities in each region during the late spring and summer of 2027. Department publications will also be used to distribute the messaging, including a short summary in the in brief section of the July 2026 Conservationist magazine, information in the 2027 spring turkey and fall deer and turkey hunting booklets, and consideration of feature articles in the Conservationist magazine. As a reminder, if the commission is to approve initial consideration today, the Secretary of State comment period will run from July 16th through August 14th. The commission would consider final approval at the September meeting, and if approved, these regulations would go into effect on February 28th, 2027. And with that, Tyler and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Tyler. Commissioners, any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Wagner. Or Commissioner Cruzy.
Go ahead.
Real quickly, just want to compliment you and the team on talking with our partners in this, or in, also people who have very strong voices and from their affected constituencies, correct? And
Absolutely.
certainly, we want to encourage firearm safety in every activity that goes on in the state of Missouri. Appreciate the interactions you've had with the Army Corps of Engineers, of course, and with the NRA, who I understand had very positive engagement with them. And I want to ask you to, again, thank the staff, and to you personally also appreciate your thoroughness in assessing the shooting regulations. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentations, and I agree with the substance of what we're trying to do here. On the identifying or marking on the sleeping beds, arrangements, sleeping bags, is it the permit holder's name is somehow included on each sleeping bag, or each individual who sleeps in a sleeping bag puts his or her name in it? And I say sleeping bag, but cot, blanket.
Sure. No, it's not meant to be on every individual item. It's meant to capture sleeping units. So if you have a group of tents out there, or a couple campers, and you're all under one permit, we want to be able, because sometimes our folks our visitors are off using the area. So somebody, staff come by, we want to be able to know that there's a permit tied to their camping.
So on a unit, and that was another
Yes.
question that I raised the other day, and we can watch it, but a permit only allows for 2 units, as I think I read.
Yes,
Even though
that's
there
correct.
may be 10 campers with that permit. So I envision, I have plenty of times gone on 3 couples on a canoe trip, or 4 couples, and we have separate pup tents or whatever. So anyhow, it'd be interesting to monitor that and see if it warrants looking at down the road. And but I appreciate what you're doing. The campgrounds need to be kept beautiful, and there has to be a sense of responsibility for the privilege of camping there. On the shooting ranges, I'm in wholehearted agreement. But if an individual is a licensed hunter, taking the hunter safety, and brings a guest, a neighbor, a 20-year-old, cousin who's never hunted, does that individual at that moment have the apprentice, can get apprentice privileges to shoot, or is he or she banned from shooting till they go get a permit and take a hunter safety class?
This would be an individual requirement, so everyone that shot at the shooting range would either need to have one of those listed permits or be exempt through one of the exemptions, such as the apprentice hunter authorization. So if they had not expended their limit of apprentice hunter authorizations previously, which is 2, then they could purchase an apprentice hunter authorization, which would allow them to purchase one of those listed permits, which would allow them to shoot at the range.
Okay, good. That makes good sense. Final thing for both. We talked about a comms plan. I think, and I'm sure it goes unsaid, but really clearly marking that at campsites and shooting ranges, new regulation, whatever, so that nobody is caught off guard because they don't look at Facebook or don't get the conservationist or whatever. I think it's very, very important.
And I'll speak for Tyler. I know that both of us have plans for new signage, both at designated camping areas and at shooting ranges to notify the public.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions for our presenters? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Tyler.
All right, Commissioners, the camping permit recommendations include proposed Rule 3 CSR 10-5.925, 5-day camping permit, to create the permit, an amendment to 10-5.950, permits required, hunting, fishing, trapping, permit pricing, permit fees, permit replacement costs, to include the new permit and cost in the list of permit fees, an amendment to 10-5.205, permits required, exceptions, to introduce the requirement for anyone camping on department areas to first obtain a camping permit, and an amendment to 10-11.140, camping, to require the proposed camping permit, add additional camping-specific requirements, and reorganize the rule for improved readability and clarity. Madam Chair, I request approval of these 4 rulemakings as described and provided in your packet.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. The last set of action items includes changes to 3 CSR 10-5.205, permits required, exceptions, that would add a permit requirement for the use of unstaffed firearms shooting ranges, along with exceptions to the requirement, and removes the requirement that an individual with developmental disabilities take a hunter education certification course. Amendments to 7 permit rules are proposed to include the use of unstaffed firearms shooting range privileges to existing permit privileges authorized by the permit. Last, proposed amendments to 10-11.150, target shooting and shooting ranges, add the permit requirement for use of unstaffed firearms shooting ranges and clearly identify staffed and unstaffed department firearms shooting ranges. Madam Chair, I request Commission approval for the suite of recommendations that would add a permit requirement for the use of unstaffed firearms shooting ranges on department areas unless exempt.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. Madam Chair, your packet includes a copy of the final periodic rule review report, along with a memo summarizing the process. A statute passed by the Missouri Legislature in 2014 requires each state agency to conduct a thorough review of its regulations every 5 years to determine if those rules remain relevant and necessary. Staff reviewed each rule within the Wildlife Code and opened them all for public comment. No changes are being recommended at this time as a result of the staff review or public comment received. However, several rules have minor clarity modifications that will be made the next time they are open for other changes. Unless you or members of the Commission have questions on the process or the final report, I will instruct staff to submit this document to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and the Small Business Regulatory Fairness Board early next month.
Proceed.
Commissioners, a summary of all citizen comments received since the last Regulations Committee report may be found in my formal report. Upcoming meetings of the Regulations Committee are scheduled for July 21st, which is mid-year code review, August 13th, and November 5th, 2026. Madam Chair, unless there are any other questions, this concludes my Regulations Committee report.
Commission, any other questions for Deputy Director Conley?
One quick question. The publication with the Secretary of State's rules of the review of the Wildlife Code, that will be open for comment and in theory come back here for final action.
So it had already been open for comment. So we accepted comment last summer on all rules within the Wildlife Code. And so this is the finalization of that process. When we open those rules for the clarity modifications and things like that, those would come to you for initial approval and then public comment also.
So what's going to the Secretary of State's office is now final then?
Correct. This is the final summary. And so basically, our regulations subcommittee went through each individual rule line by line over the last several months. And last summer into fall, the whole wildlife code was open for public comment. We received a handful of comments with respect to that. That's included in the summary that's in your report. And none of the changes that were recommended by the regulations subcommittee are substantive changes, and really they are just addressing clarity, maybe some grammatical edits and things like that to really just improve readability of the wildlife code. And so this is the third time that we've done this thorough review, and so in many cases we've already addressed some of the changes that had come up in terms of whether the rule was necessary and things like that. And I would say we are unique to many state agencies. We open our wildlife code on a very regular basis. So we are always updating and amending rules. And so we have a lot of opportunity to create that clarity, to create consistency just through our normal rule review process. And so the recognition of necessary rules, I would say we do that on an annual basis, multiple times per year already.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura,
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, everyone, we are going to adjourn for a 5-minute break, and we will reconvene at 10:35. Thank you. Recess, we'll recess, sorry, thank you. There's 2 of us. I just need 1 more. Excellent. So we are back from our recess. We're going to hop right back into the agenda. And next, we're going to hear from the administration on our budget, led by Kim Hansen, our Chief Budget Officer. Kim.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Director Sumners. I'll be presenting item number 5 on your agenda, fiscal year 2006 fiscal summary report through April. And directing your attention to the revenue variances. Total revenue for the first 10 months of 2026 through April were in line with the first 10 months of 2025 and 2.7% below expectations for this point in the fiscal year. Conservation sales tax receipts were 3.3% higher than the first 10 months in last year, and they were in line with expectations for this point in the fiscal year. Permit revenues were 11.1% higher than the first 10 months of fiscal year 25 and 4.6% above expectations. The number of monetary hunting and fishing permits sold in the first 10 months of fiscal 26 were 19,742, higher than previous year. Federal reimbursements were 29.1% lower than this time last year and 26.6% below expectations. Federal reimbursements for 26 through April represent approximately 11.6% of total revenues. Federal reimbursements for the first 10 months of fiscal year 26 have been below expectations due to the timing of reimbursement requests as well as delay of the federal review on grants. As of May 26, we have agreed on a 26 indirect rate with the Department of Interior, and we plan to claim the full projected revenues by the end of the fiscal year. Other revenue sources for the first 10 months of fiscal 26 were 19.1% higher than this point last fiscal year and 9.9% above expectations. We received 2 large donations that contributed to that, which one was in excess of $450,000 from Mildred M. Sue's Revenue Trust in July of 25, and another in excess of $350,000 from Stephen B. Bartlow's Trust for Peck Ranch in 26. And that was in January. Next, if we'll turn our attention to the expenditure variances. Total operating expenditures for the first 10 months of fiscal 26 were 4.9% higher than the first 10 months of fiscal year 25 and 2% below expectations. Operating expenditure includes personal services, expenses, and equipment purchases. Personal service disbursements were 7.6% higher than the first 10 months of the previous fiscal year and 1.4% below expectations through April. Expenses were in line with the first 10 months of fiscal year 25 and 5.6% below expectations. Equipment disbursements were 2% higher than the first 10 months of fiscal year 25 and 22.2% above expectations. You'll note first those variances between expenses and equipment disbursements. There was a disparity between those two due to a process change where under threshold costs were being coded previously to expenses are now being included in the equipment line. Total capital disbursements were 26.8% lower than the fiscal year through April and 22.5% below the budgeted fiscal amount this year. Capital expenditures include the land conservation partnerships and construction. Large payments in this time period included the Shell Osage Conservation Area, Golden Anniversary Wetland Reservation Renovation Phase 2, the Conservation Headquarters renovation, the Roaring River Fish Hatchery oxygen line replacement, the Eagle Bluffs Conservation Area pump station flood repairs, and the Runge Nature Center siding replacement. In the first 10 months of fiscal year 26, land acquisitions totaled $2.4 million and included a 160-acre addition to the Washashi Prairie for $801,000, a 77-acre addition to Pahashwaka Prairie for $386,000, a 40.5-acre addition to Mount Vernon Prairie for $281,000. That all happened in April of 2026. And then a purchase for Ravencraft Building for New Hannibal office for $807,000 in March, and a 10-acre addition to 10 Mile Pond Conservation Area for $133,000 in January. Total disbursements for the first 10 months of fiscal year 26 were 1.5% lower than the first 10 months of fiscal year 25 and 5.7% below expectations. This concludes my remarks on the fiscal year 26 financial summary through April 26, and I'd be happy to address any questions the commission may have.
Kim, great job on your first financial report to the commission. So, and officially welcome to MDC.
Very happy
You
to
have
be
to
here.
sing your high school fight song, though. That's the,
Oh, I don't even
that's the
remember that.
tradition.
You can disregard Commissioner Cruzy. I think you already answered my question that I had, and it was on revenues. So the 26.6% variance that we are seeing to our budget on the federal reimbursements, that is a timing issue, more so on request for reimbursements as well as grant fulfillment. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's on the grant side, and we had to have the agreement with the Department of Interior on those indirect rates so that we could get those indirect labor billed, and that delay has been completed. We've got that agreed now with the Department of Labor, and that billing has been completed. It's been catching up in the last 3 weeks. We've made great progress. Several $1 million has been billed, and we're starting to see those funds come in, and so we're continuing to bill out large chunks, and so it's just a matter of time now to get that funding in before the end of the year.
Excellent. Commissioners, any other questions for Kim on the financial report? Okay, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. The next item is an action item for the commission to for the approval of the fiscal year 2027 internal expenditure plan. I request the commission approval of the Conservation Commission Fund for fiscal year 2027 internal expenditure plan with a planned spending of $316 million, $506,000 with $307, excuse me. The operating budget request totals of $253 million, $253,636,307 for personal service, expense, and equipment. The capital improvement request is $62,870,000 for construction, land conservation, and partnerships. The portion of capital improvement request for new conservation land conservation and partnerships totaling $13,599,797 are budgeted utilizing revenues for fiscal years prior to fiscal year 2027. This action item also contains the request for the commission approval to maintain commission fund reserve at no lower than 60 days of operating expenditures plus restricted trust accounts.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I would highlight, Kim, as you said, we are adjusting to a 60 days of operating expenditures on the commission fund reserve.
Correct.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Kim. All right, we will transition to the Infrastructure Management Branch and Jacob Carriaga. Welcome, Jacob.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Sumners. I have the next two agenda items for the Commission. They are both action items for the Commission. The first one is a recommendation for authorization to enter into a contract with Crossland Construction Company Incorporated of Columbus, Kansas, for construction of the Pleasant Hope Conservation Area Shooting Range relocation project at a total estimated cost of $10,648,704.24. It is further requested a contingency fund of $532,500.00 be authorized for unforeseen conditions or other changes necessary to complete the project. Total authorization requested is $11,181,204.24. The project was designed by the Infrastructure Management Branch in collaboration with consultant Gradell Engineering Resources. The engineer's estimate for the project was $6,700,000.00. Two bids were accepted for the project as shown in your attached bid tabulation. Crossland Construction Company has been in business for 48 years. They have an extensive project history, including large-scale projects contracted with both private and public entities nationwide. Infrastructure Management Branch recommends the bid as submitted by the low bidder be accepted.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Jacob, if you would, for commission's kind of follow-up questions on this, would you help illuminate what staff have identified as the difference between our initial engineer's estimate and the lowest bid being considered?
I'd be happy to. So the difference between the estimated $6.7 million and the bid of $10.6 million, staff and both engineering staff of MDC and in coordination with the consultant also participated in the design and development of that estimate, did extensive line-by-line of comparison of what they estimated versus what the bids came back at. They also contacted the bidders and evaluated. And it really can be summarized in 3 points. So first of all is when the design was complete and the estimate was developed, it was this previous winter. At that time, petroleum prices were about $60 a barrel, and diesel fuel is averaging statewide about $3.50 a gallon. So when the bids were opened in early May, of course, with all the things happening in the Middle East, of course, as you know, oil prices had gone to $105 a barrel, and diesel fuel was over $5 a gallon average in Missouri. So this project is very, very soil intensive, very heavy equipment intensive. So the significant increase in those fuel prices heavily influenced the increase in anything that was associated with that heavy equipment and soil movement work. So that's the first factor that we evaluated or determined. The second is this project requires the contractor in a very methodical, step-by-step way to go through and excavate in very shallow lifts the soil at the existing shooting range and remove the lead particles. That is a very intensive project or process, and that work it has inherent risk for the contractor because it is not exactly known just how deep they will have to go, and so they priced risk into that bid item. And so that was another area of difference between the estimate and the bid. And the third is that, as I stated before, this is a very earthwork intensive project, and it is along a flowing water body. And at the time of the bid opening, we were experiencing a period of extensive wet weather. And so that introduced additional risk and concern for the contractors, and so they placed additional costs in those bid items associated with that work. So those are the three items that we identified was the difference between the estimate and the bids that we received.
Thank you, Jacob. Commission, any further discussion?
So just to elaborate a little bit, for those who are listening online and anybody in the room, anytime you get a deviation from expected expenditures, everybody in this department, certainly the commission, scrupulously scrutinizes the data. I'm very happy and satisfied with what Jacob and his team have revealed about the project and investigated thoroughly the deviation from plan, I'll say. We rarely have these kinds of overages in our expenditures, and so I think it's a hallmark of the team that we generally do a really great job of capturing this. But this is a very complex project. And to dive into the details and talk about how do we get lead out of trees, and how do we make sure that we're getting lead out of the soil, and how do we capture that lead or maintain its stability in the soil, things like that. That is super critical. I mean, we're the Department of Conservation. So we have a strong obligation to make sure when these projects take place, they're done absolutely correctly so that we preserve the environment. And so I just wanted to say thanks for the thoroughness of this. I know you saw a lot of raised eyebrows when those numbers were presented, and the defense of those also I think was really more than adequate.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, Ed.
Just so it's, maybe everybody understands this, but why is it important that we're trying to get rid of all this lead shot that's out there on these properties? Why do we want to get rid of the lead?
So lead left in place has the ability to migrate, and it is under the federal regulations for various contaminants and waterways, Clean Water Act, for example. It is important that the agency manages it. In situations like Pleasant Hope, it has accumulated over several decades. And so it is part of our best management practices to manage that lead, stabilize the site, and implement another range at that general location that has implemented best practices and what we would consider standard operating procedures for shooting ranges today.
Which is, do you use steel? Do you use steel shot at those ranges, or can you use?
So no, this is a firearms range. There was a shotgun range there that we are working to recycle lead from, but in the new facility, there will not be a shotgun range.
Great questions. All right, I will call the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Next item is a recommendation for authorization to amend the existing professional services agreement with HDR Incorporated of Omaha, Nebraska for the design and construction administration of the Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery renovation project currently paused in Laclede County. The amendment would increase the authorized not to exceed amount by $1,446,000.00 to a total of $5,314,000.00. The amendment would also extend the agreement term 18 months to September 30th of 2027, which would coincide with the anticipated completion of the construction project. The proposed amendment will provide for the anticipated construction administration services needed for successful completion of the project. Remaining services include design of remedies for previously rejected work, review of submittals, responding to requests for information, requests for proposals, and change orders, participating in progress and coordination meetings, and conducting substantial completion inspections. Infrastructure Management Branch recommends the professional services agreement with HDR Corporation be amended.
Do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And any discussion?
This is the hatchery, the hatchery's shut down right now, is that, in Bennett Springs, is that right?
That is correct.
And how long has it been shut down?
It's been over 2 years.
So this would go in the same location as where the existing shut down hatchery is, in that same footprint, basically?
Yes. The item before the commission is a amendment to the design agreement for the project that is currently
Oh,
paused.
we've already approved, okay, I got you. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I think it might be important to clarify that while the hatchery may be inoperable at the moment, the fishing is still happening at Bennett Springs.
That is correct, Commissioner. Extensive efforts have been ongoing since the beginning of the project to maintain a fishing opportunity for the public through stocking operations using fish from other locations.
Right, and by all accounts, it is full steam ahead and as good as always.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Can you remind us all, when did we build this thing? This hatchery?
The original hatchery was constructed prior to the department's formation,
There we go.
and the CCC made significant improvements in the early 30s, and then after the formation of the department, we acquired responsibility to operate the hatchery.
Yeah. So this thing's needed more than Band-Aids for a couple of decades.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Moving on to our Human Resources branch, and we have a quarterly update on our Conservation Employees Benefits Plan.
Hello. Should just be a quick update on the benefits plan, comparing the first quarter of '25 to the first quarter of '26. The benefits plan, the trust fund itself, is up to about 8.8 million in comparison to 7.6 million of last year. Some of the factors that are included in that is our rate adjustment, our tier adjustment that we've been working on the last 2 or 3 years. And then the contract change on both the medical side as well as the pharmacy side. On the medical side, we went from UMR to Anthem. We're expecting about a $1.7 million savings annually with Anthem. And then on that pharmacy side, from Express Scripts to CVS, we're expecting another $700,000 in savings with them. We do have a few more members that are looking at Medicare Advantage and looking to move to that plan as well. But then also the elimination of the disease management plan. That's where our plan was paying 100% of that cost. And so with those factors, that led to that 8.8 million. With the income to the plan increasing, we are still seeing increasing in medical costs. We're looking at about a $900,000 increase from this time last year as well on the medical side. But unlike the medical costs, for some reason our pharmacy is actually down a little bit. We went from 3.2 million to 3.1 million, which is good for us. And then as a result of the board's actions, our fund balance is in line with our consultant, which is WTW. They want us to have about 2.5 times our average monthly expenditures, and that's about 6 million, and we're sitting at 8.8 million. So it falls in line with their recommendations. And then lastly, the board remains consistent that we want a self-sustaining program or self-sustaining plan, and we'll be looking at the 2026 numbers as they're coming through, and if there's any changes, then we'll be bringing them to the commission. And that's the end of it for me.
Thank you, Agent Barnes. Commission, any questions?
Thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you very
important
much.
board.
All right, we are moving on for our Forestry Section Chief, Michael Bill.
Morning, Commission.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, the Commission, Director Summers, it's my pleasure to present the next agenda item for your consideration. The department maintains an active forest management program in conservation areas using a variety of practices. This includes forest thinning, prescribed fire, tree planting, and commercial timber harvest. These management tools are used to enhance the health and diversity of our forests and provides numerous benefits to both wildlife and Missouri citizens. In keeping with established procedures, I have the next two agenda action items for your consideration associated with the sale of forest products. The first action item is listed as 10 on your agenda. This is a timber sale in Rocky Creek Conservation Area in Shannon County. If approved, this harvest will improve forest health, long-term sustainability by using management treatments which increase sunlight to the forest floor. This will encourage oak regeneration and enhance wildlife habitat. As such, we request approval to advertise and sell an estimated 629,557 board feet of timber located on 308 acres of Compartment 13 of Rocky Creek Conservation Area in Shannon County.
Commission, do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I'd just say, I stopped by this Rocky Falls area a few months ago, and, which is absolutely beautiful where the falls are there. But you can see as you're going in there, evidence of timber stand improvement that had been done, I don't know how long ago, but the woods just look so good. I mean, they're just, you could see through them, you can see the bluffs up in the, up above there, that just really, I don't know how many years it's been since that was done. It was clear it'd been several. And you can see the fruits of that, you know, really makes a difference.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Thanks.
Excellent. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
All right. The second action item I have is listed as item 11 on your agenda, and this is a timber sale located on Graves Mountain Conservation Area in Wayne County. If approved, this harvest will improve forest health and long-term sustainability, and we use single tree selection management to increase sunlight to the forest floor. This will promote oak and pine regeneration and enhance wildlife habitat. As such, we request approval to advertise and sell an estimated 643,949 board feet of timber located on 128 acres of Compartment 4 of Graves Mountain Conservation Area in Wayne County.
Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I would just add, Michael, I think this is one of maybe a few timber sales your team has brought forward in Wayne County. So I always appreciate the statewide effort that the forestry team does.
It's across the state. Yep.
All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
All right, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much. I would like to welcome Deputy Director Aaron Jeffries, who will start with the Realty Committee report.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I have one action item for you today. Seeking Commission approval to acquire 127.5 acres in Sullivan County as an addition to Morris Prairie Conservation Area. As a part of this transaction, over $350,000 in donated funds to the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation from the Alfred J. and Joanna C. Inessi estate will be used to help with the acquisition. If approved by the Commission, the tract will be named the Alfred J. and Joanna C. Inessi tract of the Morris Prairie Conservation Area. Commissioners?
Do I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners?
Please proceed.
So next up is a brief legislative update. Just a few weeks ago, TJ and I wrapped up another successful legislative session, the second one for TJ with the department and my 20th for the department. A few highlights, obviously most important, we defended and upheld the Commission's constitutional authority and the conservation sales tax. Had the enjoyment of Senate confirmation for Commissioner Clausen and Commissioner Cruzy. That went very well. Received spending authorization for the fiscal year 2027 budget, which remained relatively unchanged from the governor's recommendations. The few minor changes are things that we can work with. I'm not quite sure this is a highlight, but we did testify on legislation that would impact the department. Seeing no legislation really advance to impact the Commission's day-to-day business. And then probably one of the things I've taken the greatest enjoyment in, TJ as well, is just working with legislators to build that relationship, to address constituent concerns related to conservation regulations, area maintenance on conservation areas, community partnerships, and a variety of other topics. We also hosted several legislative field trips and gatherings with the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, which I'm very grateful to have Representative Bruce Sassman here today and his lovely wife, Jan Sassman. Not to say that Bruce isn't lovely, but...
The Sassmans, you can give a wave. Hello.
But it's just to see how the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus has grown over the years, with fish fry, involvement in the youth turkey hunt, and a variety of other activities. In the interim, TJ and I have already started work on legislative field trips, which will start here probably in the next week or so with the infamous goose roundups around the state. Those are probably logistically one of the most challenging events to schedule with legislators because it's at 4 a.m. and you don't know where the darn geese are going to be that morning. But it's always a good time, and you always end up with some permanent grass stains as well. And it isn't grass that I'm talking about, of course. So we'll continue to watch activity on the political front. We have elections coming up here. But I will say, Commissioners, what is rather concerning is how the Missouri Constitution is really turning into a simple section of Missouri's revised statute. This year alone, we will be voting on 9 different constitutional amendments. So I just warn you of what we may see down the road, concerns with what's happening to our Constitution through the initiative petition process, but also with the General Assembly. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, any questions for Deputy Director Jeffries? Yes, Ed.
So is it a situation where the legislature is not, in the absence of action by the legislature, this constitutional amendment process has become a lot more common? Is that, I don't want you to criticize it, I'm not being critical here, but is that what's happening here? Are we doing things by constitutional amendment that in the past we've done legislatively?
Yes. Yeah. And the entire initiative petition, in my opinion, has changed from what we saw in the 30s or the 70s when citizens went out and collected signatures versus the process that we see used today.
It's driven by, potentially by interest groups or?
Absolutely.
And how many, oh, go ahead.
I just, forgive me to offer a comment, Aaron, but the process has changed across the country. Outside special interests pour a lot of money. There is a sophisticated system of gathering these signatures. It's become a big-time thing, a business, and it's easier than it used to be. And culturally, it just makes more sense oftentimes to do it that way than go into the legislature, which is not right. That's for a citizen's petition, but legislators too can make changes to the Constitution, and that's where Aaron and his team have really talked about and conveyed and communicated what this commission's all about. So we have not been threatened that way.
Well, because we have a constitutional mandate.
Yes.
Well, just highlights, if I may, Madam Chairman.
Sure.
It highlights the absolute necessity that we continue to communicate across this state with all of the constituents that we have. We represent 6.5 million people in this state. We have a number of incredibly important partners in this state. No one doubts the necessity of the work that the Department of Conservation does. So we have, our obligation is just to continue to do what we've done, and that is communicate with people where they are and add value to the lives of the citizens of the state. And I think it makes our jobs more difficult to pull the emotion out of these many issues, but also to make sure that our citizens stay engaged.
You are all absolutely correct. And I think there's more pressure and expectation of a department employee than any other agency, because what the citizens created, they could take away someday.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, we will transition to our award ceremony. Before we do have a previous commissioner in the audience. We have Cynthia Metcalf. Cynthia, will you please raise your hand? And welcome back to the commission meeting. So happy to have you here as a guest. If we would, we're going to open the doors. We have our awardees and several of their guests. So if we could kind of gather together, kind of like church on Christmas and Easter, and open up the aisles and the end seats. And Deputy Director Conley, I will let you start on your sign. What do you want me? I can't. Yeah. Yeah.
He's trying. It's his special gift. It's something.
They're starting to file in. Yeah, and I can just walk around so you can have them.
I guess we're all just sitting. I don't, she was requested to come down there, but Laura didn't look to you or me, so.
Ooh, much better.
No, I wasn't as articulate.
Test.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks for being here.
Now, will this be able to be turned around?
I don't know. We have a handheld.
Okay, I've got to know it.
Here, you can just kind of, I'm not sure if this can.
I think we can probably just close this down. And what I'll do is I'll introduce kind of the award and everything, and then we'll call you up to give you the award. Margie has a few remarks to say, and then we'll kick it over to you to share your remarks.
As far as I know, it always faces this direction. Now, I can take this laptop and set it in here.
Yeah, let's do that. Perfect.
Party's begun, I don't know.
Our podium.
All right, if everybody could find their seats.
if we could find our seats, we'll go ahead and get started. That's all I got. All right, thank you.
Authority, I did that.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a really crowded room today, and that is excellent. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Deputy Director Laura Conley, and I serve the citizens as Deputy over Resource Management. And for the members of the public joining us today, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce Commission Chair Margie Eckelkamp, Vice Chair and Secretary Ray Wagner, and we have Commissioner Wagner, and members of the commission, Ed Clausen and Frank Cruzy. We also have our Director of the Conservation Department, Jason Sumners, and Deputy Director Andrew Bond and Deputy Director Aaron Jeffries, among a lot of other staff from both Jefferson City as well as the St. Louis region. And so thank you all for being here today to recognize two Master Conservationists. Now, the Master Conservationist Award was created in 1941 to honor living or deceased citizen conservationists, former conservation commissioners, and employees of conservation-related organizations or agencies. To be eligible for consideration for the Master Conservationist Award, the individual nominated must have been or be a member of the Missouri conservation community who meets at least one of the following criteria. 1, performed an outstanding act or developed an innovative idea or technique which advanced conservation in Missouri. 2, whose dedicated service over an extended period contributed to major progress in conservation in Missouri. And 3, whose contributions to conservation resulted in lasting significance at a local, regional, or statewide scale. Now, since the Master Conservationist Award was established, 73 individuals have been honored, including today's awardees. It is my pleasure to share with you the important conservation work of Dan and Connie Burkhart. Their impact on conservation in Missouri is far-reaching, and as we go through this list, I think you'll really realize how truly far-reaching it is. From the Katy Land Trust to Magnificent Missouri, their efforts to conserve land and water for public use has inspired many to think bigger than themselves. Their efforts with conservation easements provide a voluntary way to protect land from future development, protecting critical habitat and Missouri's agricultural heritage in perpetuity. To further the reach of conservation, the Burkharts have self-published a variety of conservation books to bring the outside in. With beautiful pictures and words, their books inspire people to find joy while experiencing Missouri's amazing natural resources. The Burkharts carry many torches for conservation and carry them together. Most notably, it was their efforts that continued the vision of Ted and Pat Jones to conserve and improve the Katy Trail and forge ahead with the Rock Island Spur. Forming the Katy Land Trust in 2010, the Burkharts have successfully educated Missourians on the shared responsibility needed to conserve lands for public use. The Burkharts have also been heavily involved in the preservation of buildings of historic interest along Katy Trail waypoints and hosting What's Out There St. Louis, offering both weekend and day trips so people can enjoy and explore nature close to their homes. So much of what the Burkharts do help people connect to nature in so many different ways. The projects that Dan and Connie have supported will have a lasting impact on Missouri's natural resources and will be enjoyed by citizens and visitors to our great state for decades to come. Some of the more notable projects include the Ted and Pat Jones Welcome Center on the Katy Trail in Trelore. Dan and Connie purchased the historic Mercantile, restored the building, and donated it to the state to create the only state park-operated Welcome Center on the Katy Trail. Dan and Connie purchased the historic Piers store and created a memorable stop on the Katy Trail featuring live music, art, refreshments, and the picturesque Piers Prairie. Following in the footsteps of Ted and Pat Jones, Dan and Connie have worked tirelessly to raise funds, including their own financial resources, to support the preservation and development of Rock Island Trail State Park. They've also had numerous other conservation restoration efforts that they've spearheaded, including planting bur oaks along the Katy Trail, partnering with Forest Relief. Too many papers. On an annual tree camp for children, honeysuckle hacks, and Burkhart Grove featuring native Missouri trees. Even though they are engaged in many endeavors, Dan and Connie take time to support other conservation organizations as well. They not only support the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation, they also support the Johnny Morris Institute of Fisheries, Wetlands, and Aquatic Systems. They see value in investing in future conservationists, the ones who will continue to carry the torch. The Burkharts serve as visionaries, as motivators, as educators, as documentarians, as philanthropists, as team builders, and as selfless conservationists whose clear focus is bettering the places we call our home. Their tireless efforts to preserve, promote, and improve our state will have a lasting impact on generations to come. And I can tell you, just by the folks in the room today and the sheer number of people here to celebrate this honor, I think they've had a lasting impact on a lot of people as well in present time too, which is amazing just to see such a wonderful turnout. For their efforts, I am pleased to invite Commissioner Eckelkamp to present their Master Conservationist Award. Dan and Connie, will you please step forward?
That was very beautiful.
There is no doubt that Dan and Connie's contributions to conservation in Missouri have brought a broad and long-lasting impact. Due to their dedication and passion for conservation, Missouri is a better place. This photograph of the American goldfinch represents an example of wildlife commonly seen at pollinator gardens, just like the one you created at the Pier store just here across the river, and which has been designated a pollinator garden of excellence by the Grow Native program. On behalf of the Conservation Commission, it is my honor to present to you the Master Conservationist Award.
So thank you. At this time, Dan and Connie, if you'd like to say a few words, introduce any family that you have here, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, first, I must begin with sincerest thanks to the Conservation Commission and to the department for a truly wonderful surprise. We are honored to be recipients, and we will redouble our efforts to help Missourians appreciate the natural splendor around us. And right now, I just have to say, go Amendment 1. So that's next in our sights. In a couple of minutes, I'll pass the mic today to Dan for the arc that brought him to this podium. But first, since we're sharing this award, a little bit about his co-conspirator. In this duet, I'm a lifelong Missourian and Dan is a convert. And like all the best converts among us, he believes in the special attributes of Missouri with all of his heart and soul. I, on the other hand, was born and raised here. And thanks to genetics and then some devoted Daughters of Charity and some really talented School Sisters of Notre Dame, I was always a serious student, a good student who wanted to learn everything about every subject. But when I encountered diagrammed sentences, parts of speech, and spelling bees, it was like someone handed me my first guitar or my first sketchbook. I knew I would be working with these tools all of my life, but little did I dream that they would be as Dan Burkhart's accomplice. So I've lived in Missouri for 70 years, and just about halfway along this journey, I went to work for Edward Jones. In the days when Ted Jones was still roaming the second floor of our building and handing out various assignments. He asked me to drive to Tennessee with him and to Indiana and other places for various meetings with our salespeople, but he was truly fired up about the Katy Trail, and it seemed like everyone at work knew about his biggest project outside the office. At this time, Dan and I would spend our weekends looking at farms and barns using classified ads that we clipped from the newspaper. Dan already owned a farm, but we loved exploring the Missouri countryside, and I learned a lot about the Missouri River Valley on these long drives. We would make detours to Ted and Pat's farm, and often to have lunch at Marlene's. And then early in our courtship, Dan actually said to me, "You are just like Patsy, but with a manicure." And for anybody who knew Patsy, this is a really great compliment. I mean, I totally understood what he meant. Let's see, after Ted died,
Dan found reasons for us to go for field trips to see Pat and her dogs for an enthusiastic update on all of her studies and ecological concerns. And then fittingly, I have to say, we were meeting with state parks in the guest house out at Prairie Fork one morning, and as we were leaving, Jamie Coe, who's here today, came up and grabbed Dan's arm and told us that Pat had just passed away. So it was just always fabulous to be out there with them. So as you've heard, I had the good fortune to learn about Missouri's conservation ethos from three of the best, Ted and Pat and Dan. And when Dan and John McFeeters launched Magnificent Missouri to practice conservation through storytelling, as they called it, I knew that I had already learned from some of the state's best narrators. But when I look around this room, I mean, I must say, Bruce and Tyler and Bill Rupert and others, you know, you're still out there telling the stories every day, and we love spending time with you. So whatever mastery I have of conservation for this Master Conservationist Award comes directly from Ted and Pat and Dan, plus the blessing of living on a farm that was homesteaded by Schwartz, tended by Hellebushes, and now by Burkhart's. Bethlehem Valley Farm, where we live with Dan's sister and brother-in-law who are here, was walking distance from Bethlehem School, a one-room German language schoolhouse. And when Dan bought this farm, it was platted for 5-acre chalets around a lake because they were going to dam this beautiful valley. We really got serious about stopping the bulldozers to save the valley, and we bought the farm. And that's when my personal immersion into land conservation began, but really it was more like being radicalized, like I couldn't think about anything else again. I have a couple of thoughts in closing. I may share this award, but I want to assure the commission and the department and everybody who worked on this that Dan is the civilian embodiment of your mission and everything that you value and work for. He figuratively and literally goes to sleep reading, thinking, and talking about the Missouri countryside. And as all of you know who work with him, many of you in this room, the emails go out at 5 a.m. with everything that he came up with overnight. And when I look at this audience, I too just want to take one little step aside and say to some of our special friends in the audience, like Petra and Gloria and Sandy and Billy, Peggy, and others, we love our lives, but we also know what it's like to look at our other half and just say, I'm simply amazed by the creativity, the time, and energy that they have decided to devote to the natural world, and we're very, very lucky to be married to these gentlemen. To the department again and to the conservation, I want to say to you today, you chose the right guy, and so did I. Finally, I promise, Dan and I know that the Missourians in conservation roles work tirelessly. You are underpaid, you are often underhydrated, and clearly underthanked. Many of your constituents, the turkeys and snakes, the frogs, birds, pollinators, native plant species, insects, microbes, rivers, streams, and our lungs, do not know how to appropriately express their gratitude. So, with this beautiful award in hand, I will speak on their behalf and say that all of the wild things that spend their lives in Missouri, thank you sincerely and deeply for your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Well, as every husband here can attest, it's possible to do something like this without the steadfast support of your wife, but it's not probable. And no spouse could be a better partner in all we've done than my in-house editor, fact checker, personal chef, and chief encourager, Connie. So I think you've got a little taste of that. But I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about my personal path that started when my family arrived in Jefferson City, and this is going to pick up from here, so don't be scared. In the 1960s, and when I moved there, the biggest news in town was the beautiful new Conservation Department headquarters. This wood and glass building, spectacular countryside just west of Jefferson City. And I didn't know exactly what went on in there, but I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I'd grown up on a farm. I loved nature. I loved the outdoors, and I wanted to find a way to be a part of what was going on at the Department of Conservation. And eventually I did become part of it in a way. My formal conservation resume starts when I got a job in a windowless basement room of that beautiful building, bundling fishing license receipts into groups of 50. I spent 2.5 months in the basement of the new building. At that point, I had no skills, no conservation ability, no training, no nothing, but I knew I loved the outdoors. And that was my start, and following that inauspicious beginning, I did what many people have done. I religiously read the Conservationist magazine, became a dedicated canoeist on Ozark rivers, memorizing Oz Hawksley's guidebook, started the annual ritual of ordering trees from the MDC nursery, and then giving some of the grandchildren that are here in this room today trees to take to school to give to their friends at the right time of year. We gave them the natural events calendar to let them know when birdsong peaks and the frogs start to croak. And those grandchildren, with a lot of help from their mother, who's here today, sponsored a conservation camp for their friends one summer. Connie and I have placed dozens of bluebird houses on our farm, removed thousands of honeysuckle and autumn olive, planted trees in the prairie along the Katy Trail, and placed a conservation easement on our 220-acre farm. And a short 60 years later, after bundling those fishing licenses, here we are. In front of this group, though, I know we're just two of hundreds in Missouri that could receive an award like this. I know there are people out there doing remarkable things for our environment and our landscape every day. And I know the reason we got this, it is because of the people in this room. And that is as sincere statement as I have ever made. Every person here has helped us in what we've done, every aspect of it. And it's like that old story about the turtle on the fence post. You know when you see it, they didn't get there by themselves. And we didn't either. We got here with your help. And without going full Academy Awards on this, I want to just give a shout out to people who unfortunately aren't here with us today that were instrumental in my being able to do this. And the first, of course, are my parents. Alice and Alfred Burkhardt. I started life with them on a southern Michigan farm, 120 acres of row crops and some pasture and a woodlot. And they both grew up on small farms. And today that farm background, as many of you I know realize, is becoming more rare. And the need to figure out a way to connect these people that are growing up today with nature becomes more and more critical because there's less and less natural contact with it. And that's what MDC does such an amazing job of every day, every year. And it's something of great value. So I learned it working with my dad, taking hogs and cattle to market and seeing him talk to hay buyers and select wood to be cut out of our woodlot. My mom taught me about the beauty of nature and identifying wildflowers. And that brings up a point that I've been wanting to talk about for 30 years. Prior to today, the person in our family who had received the most accolades from MDC was my mom. In 1995, she was featured in the Conservationist magazine demonstrating her hobby of pressing flowers and leaves to a group of school children from West School in Jefferson City. And I've been envious for 30 years, and I'm finally catching up. And of course, we also, as Connie mentioned, have to thank Ted Jones. In 1978, I was lucky enough to go to work for Edward Jones in St. Louis. In addition to getting a job that I badly needed at the time, I was also getting a role model and a mentor who happened to have his name on the building. Ted and I worked closely together while he fought for the Katy Trail, and he was never awarded the Master Conservationist Award. I looked back, Pat was awarded it 20 years ago in 2006, and Connie and I are here today to pick up this beautiful and much appreciated award, and we want to share it with Ted for what he did to further conservation in Missouri, but more importantly, what he did to set an example for us and many others about it. And among other conservation friends that are no longer with us, I've got to thank John McFeeters, who co-founded Magnificent Missouri with me in 2012. Today, I'm pleased to say that our MAGMO directors are here, everybody with the exception of one, Jeff Poncho, Scott Wolf, Tyler Schwartz, and of course Connie. David Kelly is a director, but he couldn't be with us today. From the outset, Magnificent Missouri was intended to be a different kind of conservation organization, and we wanted to collaborate with other conservation groups, historical, arts, cultural groups, on projects across Missouri along the Katy Trail. We wanted to use that trail corridor, America's longest and narrowest state park, to connect people to nature. We didn't want to replicate the work of the other great conservation organizations, many of them represented here today. We wanted to find ways to collaborate them to make the tent bigger and bring new audiences to conservation. Speaking of that, the former Conservation Federation of Missouri President Ron Coleman was always looking to make the conservation tent bigger, and that's how I met him in 2012. When we formed MAGMO, he reached out to me to see how we could work together and how CFM could help us achieve our goals. And Ron was the one who introduced me to Tyler Schwartz. Rob Trulask was a personal friend of mine who shared a love of trees and conservation issues. He passed away in 2008. His generosity and conservation beliefs led him to start the Robert J. Trulask Family Foundation to further conservation causes in Missouri. Jack Galmish was the former CEO of the Nine Network. Jack and I worked together on many, many projects and documentaries. He was instrumental in the creation of Magnificent Missouri. Jack worked closely with Amy Shaw, who's here today, recognizing the role that she could play at the Nine Network in the future. And I'm pleased to report that with Amy and others, represented here by Once Films in St. Louis, we're working on a new documentary about the Katy and Rock Island Trails and the Brickline Trail, an urban trail in St. Louis. This documentary will be out this fall. It's 28 years since we did our first documentary on the Katy Trail with the Nine Network, and Patrick Murphy is here today. And Patrick and I spent many hours in 1997 and 1998 doing that first documentary. And the new documentary, as I said, is going to be out this fall. You can see it on Channel 9. We're going to have viewings of it in Columbia and a variety of places along the route of the Rock Island and the Katy. And lastly, I want to mention Peter Raven. Peter Raven was former president of the Missouri Botanical Garden and an environmental superstar who passed away just a few weeks ago, as I'm sure many of you know. As a global leader in conservation, he introduced us to conservationists from UCLA to Key West and on to Havana. Every one of those many connections produced ideas and inspiration that we've used with Magnificent Missouri. And I've met a lot of remarkable conservationists in my time, but I have to mention only one of them, Peter Raven was a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science in Rome, reporting directly to the Pope. So that's as close as you can get to up there. Peter was not only a scientist, but a communicator and a collaborator without equal. He could not say no to any conservation cause, including many of ours. And I'm pleased to say that the new president of the Missouri Botanical Garden, Lucia Lohman, is here with us today. She worked with Peter in the early 2000s when she was a student at UMSL in St. Louis. Finally, there are a lot of incredibly talented artists, musicians, photographers, and historians here today, and you all know who you are, and you know how you've used your talents to help us connect people to conservation. We've often said that we hope people come to magnificent Missouri for the fun and the art and the music, and they stay for the conservation. These artists with a brush, a camera, a banjo, or a pen and paper portray the Missouri we want to conserve. They tell stories and histories that connect us to the landscape and how we formed that landscape and how that landscape has formed us. Special thanks to Brian Haynes, Billy O'Donnell, and the late Gary Lucy for their work, and to Gloria Attune and Michael Bauermeister, who live along the trail, believe in the trail, and help us in many ways. And all of us talk about the need to impart conservation values to future generations. It's been mentioned a couple times. And that, I have to say, is especially satisfying when it happens with your own future generations. And I can see some of them sitting here in the audience. Our grandchildren. Connie and I thank our 4 children and their spouses. They all have a love of nature and an appreciation of birds and wildlife in the outdoors, except maybe the 7-month-old in Chicago, but he's going to come around. And they understand it. Most importantly, they understand the need to protect this for their children and grandchildren. And today our son Reed is here from San Diego, as well as daughter Katie, like the trail, and her husband Scott, who live in Chesterfield. And I just want to mention, before I forget, that Katie and Scott are reshaping the Dutso Trailhead, where we're going to have lunch after this. And I think you'll get an idea of their commitment to the future of the Katy Trail. And the last recognition is to 3 people who've been essential to Magnificent Missouri since before the beginning. Norman Hellebush and his son Christopher from Marthasville, who do everything for Magnificent Missouri that we need done with a tractor, a skid steer, a shovel, and that's much appreciated. And also our administrative person, Renee Bohall, who does everything that needs to be done with a computer. And now we're going to take a short ride across the Missouri River Bridge, and if you don't know where it is, it's 11861 East Highway 94, and we're going to have a box lunch, and we're going to actually get to spend some time close to the Katy Trail. It's about a 5-minute drive from here. We hope that all of you can join us. And again, thanks to the Missouri Department of Conservation. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to talk to you all the prior comments, but we sincerely appreciate what you've done for us, and we appreciate what the Department of Conservation does to make our state envied by everybody in the nation. And it wouldn't happen without people like you who've been willing to do this for all these years. So thanks so much, and thanks to all of you.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming today and really sincerely appreciate the support for Dan and Connie and the tremendous work that they've done over the years. I will kick it over to Commissioner Eckelkamp to close out the meeting, but before you all leave, as you're heading over to lunch and greeting one another, we have light refreshments in the back, so feel free to have a quick snack on your way over to lunch. And Commissioner Eckelkamp.
Excellent. Well, what an inspiring way to end our meeting today. Again, thank you all for coming to Washington. And with that, I consider us adjourned.